Ipcc for 2022. To start us off, I'd like to welcome Councillor Foley to open our hui with a karakia. Kia ora, Will.
Kia ora, Chair. Morena, everyone. We're a bit light on the ground this morning with many of us on Zoom, and obviously COVID and ill health is sweeping through our region, so we just wish everyone and their families the best and speedy recoveries. If I could just ask you that we all join in with our normal opening prayer. Whakataka, te hau, ki te uru. Whakataka, te hau, ki te tonga. Kia mā, kina kina, kia ta. Kia mā, tarata, ki toi. E haki ana, te atakuru. He tuo, he hoka. Te hei, mōri ora.
Kia ora, tēnā koe, Will, for our opening. And just to say to all those at home, please rest up and get well. We have 5 members in the chamber, so it's about 50-50 on the board and in the chamber. Just some housekeeping rules. Kia ora, Chair Rick.
Kia ora, kia ora.
Housekeeping, so this meeting has been live streamed on Council Facebook page and recorded for viewing at a later date on your YouTube channel, on our YouTube channel. In the event of an earthquake, drop, cover and hold. If the shaking is long and strong, when shaking subsides, leave the building through the nearest exits and proceed immediately towards Napier Hill along Dalton Street to Tiffin Park, continuing up the steps to Cameron Road. In an evacuation, if an emergency alarm sounds, immediately evacuate the building through the nearest exits and proceed to the assembly area on the grass at the corner of Dalton and Voltaire Streets. Emergency exits are clearly signposted. 1, 2, tapai. The council chamber is currently designated as a public place, and the council's policy is that a 1.5 metre physical distancing is required and face masks must be worn at all times. And the last housekeeping item is toilets are located down the hall to the left of the chamber entrance. Kia ora koutou. Following that, do we have any notices for today? There are no notices. Any apologies? I have one from Yurif, who is stuck in the Coromandel. He might join us online if he can get a connection. Why? Any other apologies? Now, if someone move and second, receive and move Councillor Barker, and second Councillor Williams. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you very much. Any conflict of interest declarations to be made in today's items? If there are none, thank you very much. Confirmation of the 10th of November 2021 minutes, EICC minutes. Are there any amendments to be made from those minutes? If there are not, can I please have someone move? Councillor Curtin, Councillor Foley second. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Follow-ups from the previous EICC meeting. Ian, I'll hand it over to you.
Morena koutou committee. Yes, the action is on me. As the follow-up notes there, we will be organising a field trip to visit that site and a few others. We're actually looking at planning a series of field trips. We're probably overdue to get you out and show you some of the work that's happening in the region. So we'll prepare those and let you know in due course.
Thank you very much. Yep, it sounds very positive. Any other comments on that follow-up item? All right,
Madam Chair?
Yes, Api.
Just a question to Tom around whether or not the opportunity to extend that invitation to members of the Māori Standing Committee and the PSGs of the RPC. I think it would be beneficial for us to get a first-hand opportunity to look at some of the on-ground work that our staff are doing and appreciate how the application of conversation and science is meeting the ground in our areas.
Fantastic idea, Api. Thank you very much, Ian.
Yes, through you, Chair, that's absolutely. It'll be inclusive, so whoever wants to come along is more than welcome.
Thank you, Api. Any other comments on that follow-up item? If there are none, I'm happy to move that, and can I have a seconder for the follow-up items? Thank you, Rick. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you very much. Now we're going to enter into our presentations. We've got Dr. Edgar Burns. No
minor items?
Oh, and the minor items first. Rick,
Yes.
my apologies.
It's all right. We're all racing through. It's great to see. So keen to get to the end of the agenda. I want to talk about meeting venues
Yes.
for EICC.
Okay, thank you. Any other minor items for today? No, couple.
Sorry, Madam Chair, obviously, is just COVID and regional council staff and COVID.
Thank you.
Is that within the terms of reference? The ICC?
If it's in...
We've got a very
Possibly.
liberal chair. I thought that's what he was doing. He was just sort of seeing the outer limits of the chair's rulings.
I've got no objection to it. I was just wanting to understand where the limits of minor items are with framed to the terms of reference of the committee or anything.
We've been very liberal on these things over the past.
If it's to
I remember
do... If it's to do with our staff...
Got to be sort of consistent with what we do as a council, though.
Okay.
I'd like to ask Chris and Ian on that question, if you think it's applicable, that we understand better our staffing operational capacity currently, because I think that's what the minor item is referring
As it
to.
relates to our environmental
So,
work.
Yeah.
Absolutely can provide
Okay,
you
no,
comment
that's
on that
problem,
in
no
minor
problem,
items, yeah, in terms of impact of COVID on our operational delivery programs.
Okay.
Is that fine, Councillor
All
Williams?
good as go. I just
Yep,
wanted to
thank
understand
you.
how this works.
Any other minor items? Nope. Okay, Dr. Edgar Burns, back to you. Welcome back. We have a great presentation by the looks of it around developing ways of working with rural women as it comes out of your second report and review back to us. Thank you very much. Ian?
Thank you,
Ian, would you like to introduce?
Chair, yes, perhaps just before Edgar, we've got a presentation that he'll run you through. Probably quite poignant that the day after International Women's Day we're having a report on working with women in a rural environment. As you mentioned, this is series 2 of 4 in the instalments from Edgar. The paper, or Edgar's report, covers many aspects of our work and has potential to impact the way we work across lots of parts of council business. You get the first view of this, the first opportunity to talk to Edgar about it. Subsequently, as we did with the first report, we'll workshop this with staff and we'll unpack it in more detail and work out what it means and ask the so what questions about how it will impact the way we operate. So that's to come. But yeah, hopefully you've all had a chance to read the report, and Edgar will run you through a summary of that.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Madam Chair. Of all the public speaking I've done, this is the first time I've actually spoken with a mask on. And I have some concerns, as you said, Madam Chair, about casting my voice so people can hear. So please keep chiming in if the speaking's not coming clearly to you.
Sorry, Edgar, could I just stop you and check in with our participants over Zoom that they have been able to hear us clearly? Charlie, could you let me know?
We can hear.
Can hear. Okay, thank you.
Very good. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Okay. As a sociologist, this sort of topic seems, in its outline, about gender and men and women in society is a very familiar sort of topic, and the rights and wrongs and the changes is pretty central to some parts of our work. And I've been very impressed with some of the stuff that's happening in the Hawke's Bay Regional Council as I've been researching this topic and bringing together some findings from other places. So it's quite a nice positive note, and I want to avoid, for us as a group at this table and those listening in, a sense of either being too woke or too traditional. I want to sort of have that as an open kind of question, and so my definitions that I put in there are not about you're right because you hold this view and you're wrong because you hold this view, to have a certain ambivalence that we're comfortable with, but as we talk about it explicitly amongst ourselves as a council, we can use that consciousness to push towards the goals that we think we want. In particular, today, the role of women. See which way we go. I thought we'd start on something that's not specifically environmental, although of course cars have immense environmental consequences. As a side factoid, about 1.25 million people are killed a year globally in cars. The good news is that's less in the developed worlds. This vehicle was developed from a letter by a rural woman in the early 1930s. She wrote a letter to the head of the Australian Ford Company and said, in these slightly poor times, it's a little bit of a problem only having one vehicle, because on Sunday you need to go to church and on Monday you need to take the pigs to market. And her particular complaint that is not apparent here is that the rain comes in the curtains at the side of the vehicle. And so she proposed this vehicle, and at first it seemed very astonishing, and the Americans never quite took to it in the same way, but in Australia, of course, it's an icon, not quite this model anymore, but the sense of being able to be a utility, but also doing many of the family things that a rural family needs to do. So I thought you'd kind of like that's a Dinkum Aussie farmer woman innovating, suggesting an innovation, putting it through the system, and eventually turning something very powerful and very useful out from it. And so our context, of course, most of you here will be aware of the last few weeks of the second drop of Ipcc 6. We've got the third one dropping in a month or two's time. The first one said unequivocal human cause, and then you see these kind of headings for the second drop. What I find with students, and I think it's true for us, and we need to be conscious of as a council, each year, and I can see it in the last year, there's been a big shift in people's willingness to refer to climate change. The deeply embedded denialism is lightening and going away. What is now the next step that's not really appreciated, and even for ourselves, perhaps not as deeply appreciated, is the speed and the amount of change for climate and the irreversibility that's going to happen. So currently, just to go sideways for a minute, the rate of heating is not the 1.4 everyone would like, the 1.5 they'd like to stay to, it's nearly double that. So we need women, we need men, we need every person on board, because we're getting into very difficult territory. And of course the council will get into that territory. So to go back to the questions of gender, it's very easy when we talk about gender to end up talking about women. And of course that's an important part of that. But we also need to talk about men, because how men act in relation to how women are expected to act or do act is sort of, it's a yin and yang thing. So our New Zealand settler culture has deeply inscribed masculine sort of values in it. And so we've done this immense change since women started going to universities in big quantities in the 60s and 70s. We now have this change of the balance of knowledge and sophistication and education. Used to be if a woman was largely domesticated, of course she didn't have those contacts at the butter factory, at the wool sector, sale yards and so on, but nowadays she's just as likely to. So I want to both honour it, but also recognise it has a sort of, there's that toughness. I've just reread Scott's Looking for Charlie Upham, and Charlie Upham was an absolute iconic. He's fearless. Questions of death, questions of life-threateningness come out of this culture. That is our New Zealand farming culture. And I'm a product of that at a later generation myself. So I'm familiar with it, I respect it, but we can see we've got to tease it apart, because some parts of it, as for any of us, what we know in our life, we tend to stay with. That's why grandparents have grandchildren, to teach them about computers, because they know what they knew before. In farming, we tend to know what we knew before. And there's this need to shift and be able to draw out some new abilities that we perhaps haven't made use of as richly as we could. So this is a quote from a recent news. And so for your first argument, the obvious argument is if some woman would like to be in farming, why not? Why have our definitions that sort of shut them out or channel them only to be wool classes when there's so many other things they might do as well? I don't know if you know about milking, but sometimes there's more milk produced by a woman milker if she treats her animals. There's no reason why men can't treat their dairy cows kindly and well as too, but there has been a certain roughness in some men that makes a literal difference in milk production. So this is the kind of thing, this is a conversation with a student who came back to second education, and she said in the Napier accounting office, we tended to have this very settler culture separated out and very divided, where men thought they were farmers, but they only knew what they knew from the farm, not perhaps from a more extended education. But the women were often very capable in running the farm books. I refer in the technical paper to something I found really interesting for me, is the lovely Taihape couple, good-hearted people, probably should have retired quite a while ago, but very certain on the one hand that they were a bit anti the government, or whoever the government was, that sort of sense of pushing back, sense of wanting to be autonomous, but also very sure that they were doing the right thing by the environment. And yet the slips on their place, the fatalism that they offered, that you just get slips, we see that with Wairau people sometimes. I think in a larger global setting, even outside the council's work, I would say, perhaps wearing my academic hat, that we shouldn't be farming that land. And so that's a very confrontational, it could be a very confrontational, threatening kind of thing to those kind of people who've invested their whole lives and soul in that kind of work, on that kind of place. We are in 200 years a real degradation of our topsoils and our fertilities and so on. So it's a real, so I think there's a lot more of that around. The explicit denialism's going away, but there's still that paradox in people's head that is something we have to work with, farm, you might say, in a way. So, just to note some of the many ways in which women are contributors, sometimes just for tax purposes, but more nowadays than just nominal. You get involvement in books and financial and where are we going and what are we spending on capital assets on our farms and properties. And you see there I've included women in Maori corporation boards. Maori men can be as conservative as white men, and so that's often quite a job for a Maori woman to find a place and use her smarts in the corporation to bring things around and make things happen as well. So that extra set of ideas. Something I didn't put in the paper, you often find on boards and committees, as opposed to a family farm, you don't just need one woman, that ends up being tokenism, you need a group of three. And at that point, we men stop saying, oh, let's have the woman's point of view and then back to the real work. When there's three or more women in a mix, you start having a conversation where, oh, so you think that as a man, you think that as a woman, you think that as a woman, you think that's a man, and it becomes a more balanced kind of conversation. So this is not trying to be comprehensive, it's just trying to list and draw out so we could look at it and say, my goodness, there are some very clever things that we can do and it can be done by women that we can add. So again, in the interest of not being doctrinaire, I'm not saying men can't do these things or aren't good at them. Many of you people here in your various roles of leadership do quite a lot of these things anyway. But if we're talking of the width of farmers, there's a lot of farmers who don't do all of these things, and so we add these into our mix with some value, I think. And so you tend to get things that are pulled out quite strongly about emotional strength, about resilience. Women bring their own perspectives to things. And I drew that quote out. It's an interesting kind of question. Are women inherently more attuned to nature? I'm sure as men you could put up a big case for that not being the case, that you desperately and deeply are committed and interested and have an affinity. But it's an interesting kind of debate that we can leave sitting there. And insofar as we're a bit traditional in our rural sectors, then there's probably some of that belief, that sort of the moral strength that women can bring to various situations. So we don't have to decide the scientific difference, but if there's a tradition or a culture, let's see if we can access that and make use of it for the benefit of the projects that we're trying to run through. Some of you will have come across She Looks Like Me, but I think Beef and Lamb have done a great thing there in having pictures and websites and Facebook where young women interested in farming, it nudges them to, oh yes, there's somebody like me. I've seen that in young boys in classes, young Maori boys saying there's no pictures of me. There's no brown kids here. But as soon as you've got a kid can see a brown picture, they can say, oh, somebody like me. And I think the same logic applies to men and women feeling comfortable in the rural sector. Not just as a farm wife, by all means, all those good values there, but as a thought or an opinion or let's do it this way can be a contribution. If you're like me, I would always say in my rural business, my wife was way smarter than me. And so it was absolutely important, and it's the nature of our relationship, but it's important to have that kind of knowledge and input into decisions going forward. So a bit of a summary from traditional farming. We're in a process of coming to what I call professional farming, but where question of costs are just naturally part of it these days. My dad got his first loan on the back of an envelope. When I applied for my first loan as a young man, they said, oh, we know Ralph, your dad, you must be a good guy, but go away and do a budget. And so we're moving in that kind of direction in terms of farming, and women have all sorts of skills in exactly that world. So if you didn't know it, let me tell you that there's more women with degrees around now than men in New Zealand. So you might be a smart man, that's great, but if you if you haven't already, we've really got to get a head around the conversations with smart women putting their input into it. And we are particularly interested in bringing that to questions of environmental action and sensitivity. So a new generation of farmers. In a report I chipped the Hamish picture on the top right there because they mentioned Hamish's name but not Amy's. Now that's traditional reporting. And sure, he's the farmer and he's speaking on various public forums at times, but Amy is half of the deal. And you and I can also very subtly fall into that trap. We need to say the engine of that place is Amy as much as Hamish. Now we've got a more traditional male-female role in that next one. Some of it's about learning. We're all learning all the time. I'm, of course, buying books every week. Learning a lot. This Canadian scientist is the one that found about trees talking to one another. That they exchange, they'll keep a dead tree going in their midst for some hundreds of years occasionally. Quite astonishing really. They transfer information about dryness and nutrients and between shingly. I encourage you to have a fun 10 minutes just listening to her. But on the strength of that, I want to think whether women in our mix would respond. And it's a question I'm asking you. Council staff or councillors on this committee may have a range of opinions about that. But it does seem to me that if we are trying various things, would women or families respond to some sort of competition that was both a communication exercise, but it also addressed our environmental issue particularly, where a number of our farmers say, oh, I'm a farmer, not a tree guy, and you get all the allergies about trees, yet we as council would desperately love an enormous number of trees for shelter, for holding ground together, for river work and so on. Would this be a sort of a storyfied way that would catch the imagination? We could dine out on great publicity. Can I make an offer to put myself where my words are? If in the grouping and thinking about this, we decided with our new ambassador, with our new translation kind of work, that something like this would be worthwhile, I'd be prepared to buy 10 books on my own personal account and contribute those. So it doesn't have to be, but I just think, and it doesn't have to be this kind of book, it might be another book you think is really kind of what would just bring forward people to own the fact that my environment is terribly important on whatever land I'm involved with. Now, I see great signs of what's happening in this council's catchment work. Stories coming back of some women involved in leadership positions, and I've tried to capture that up, some of what I've been hearing. They're good at networking, good at texts and in emails, Facebooks. They're listening to what people are saying in some of those groups and sub-catchment groups. Some really good work being done, and so if we can support that, honour it, direct it, but we're not in the business of overburdening that, but if we can support it, it may be something that's really good. So that sense of me as an older guy standing there thinking, well, you know, this is all pressure, 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 and I know John and I know Bill here, that's a different take, whereas some of our women in these catchment groups are starting to be much more bringing in. So, I mean, there's no reason why guys can't have those skills, and the better guys do have those skills. But our catchment staff really have to work with what they get, and so there's some possibilities there for just lifting that and increasing the leverage we get for a given dollar and a given day of our staff's effort to achieve the kind of outcomes we're really wanting to push towards. So I want to just do a couple of other slides, what I call teaching and learning slides. This is not teasing our science guys here, but the left-hand picture with the lovely sunny sunflower is 20th century science. Most of you learnt the word photosynthesis at school. It's the biggest, longest word you knew, and you didn't quite know what it meant, but there's a lot of chemical equations, and the sunlight was the energy, and the tree grew from there. The modern science, the 21st century science that's been shifting in our generation, is that 80% of the world's biomass is just under the soil. And so some part of this story, in a slightly interesting, slightly exciting, you don't have to do anything, but just shifting the consciousness of our farmers, it may well be that if we had some together session with women farmers, catchment leaders, they would find this really helps them think about, at the moment we're focusing on water, aren't we? All the time it's water. Farmers know the catchment boards are on about water. But in the end we'll have to shift to being about soil. And of course we are on about soil with erosion. But soil is the engine room in which the other half of this picture, it's not just the energy coming down, but the transferring of the minerals into compost and pulling the carbon down and holding the carbon is that. And here's another one that I quite like that might appeal to me, and I've tested on one or two students, but it might appeal as something that women can make sense of, that there's a lot of magazines nowadays talk about your gut health and your biome. Well, soil biome, we often use the word biota, is very directly, so it's not just a metaphor, it's literally all part of it. You know, the thing about kids growing up on farms having a better overall immune program because their bodies have come across everything all the time. So it seems to me these are stories that, if we could find ways to develop them, might really help convince. What we want to do is settle into everybody's mind that we have to do this natural environmental thing because it's terribly important. And so we need to sort of encourage people to learn. So a couple more.
Excuse me, we've got about 5 more minutes of the presentation.
Okay.
Yep.
So this one, very briefly, is that just how we tackle this. I don't know that I have all the answers here, but it does seem to me that whether it's working with people and women involved in sectors already, we don't want to overburden people. Madam Chair, I'm sure you know you're busy enough and many other things. So we've got to partly feed people's interest and imagination and support. So just how we do it, I think there's a lot of room for discussion. And so our final slide then is this one, which I showed you this slide as my last slide last time I spoke with you. And it's about this guy getting an electric bike and owning the sense he suddenly started talking environmentally. And my point for you today is that the woman on the farm liked the bike. So that was just a footnote last time, but we could actually think about that a little bit further. Thank you very much. Sorry, that's a little bit long.
No, thank you, Dr. Burns. And thank you for your offer for supporting staff or counsellors with the 10 book offer. So I'm sure we'll get a hold of you, or they'll get a hold of you regarding that. And I'd just like to say that, I agree that women do bring a unique perspective and skills that make success intergenerational. So thank you for your report. Now, I'm assuming everyone's read the paper. So if we can please have questions for Dr. Edgar Burns or comments, if we can keep them to a couple of minutes each, that would be fantastic. So, committee members. Any questions? Well, I know you look like you're gunning for it.
I didn't want to go first, but thank you, Dr. Edgar. Probably just a little bit about myself to give some context. I'm a shin beef farmer. I haven't hit the the magical 45 that you talk about in your paper, that
Okay.
where they apparently all turn bad. I am doing some regenerative farming, fourth generation farmer. So reading your paper, I feel like I've got some ticks and some crosses. I agree with a lot of your points. There's some snippets there around your the way we should be thinking about the environment. I really agree with some of those points. But in summary, I read the paper and it comes across as though, you know, right from when the first settlers arrived to now, you know, the men have, you know, done everything wrong, and we need the women to come along as the ones to fix this. And I just feel, and probably just also, you know, there's some real generalisations all through that paper, which I think you've, you know, grabbed to suit the narrative that I don't necessarily agree with. But that's that would be my summation.
No, I think that's a very reasonable kind of comment, and it's very hard to sort of steer a line between making a point and then sort of, as you say, slagging you and all your ancestors, which absolutely is not meant to be. And I tried to own that I'm in that sequence myself. But speaking as an academic, I think New Zealand was a wonderful new opportunity. Excuse me, Maori people, but it was a wonderful new opportunity for a fairly impoverished world from Europe, and we collectively, whoever's doing it, we've never really addressed the question of the downgrading of the land. You know, we clear land, but the ability to hold the land where it is rather than move it out to sea. So I'd make that of my interpreting my own history rather than trying to weaponise it against you or any other farmers. But it's very difficult to. How do we criticise that we need to do some things differently without sort of slagging people? It's not entirely an age thing. You know, I've come across one or two young men who could have been 80, and people like yourself who are deeply involved in those regenerative kind of questions, in those kind of building up the soil, building up the cleanliness of the water. So, yeah, thank you for that. It's good
Thanks for your
caution.
perspective, Will. I've got a question for our staff, mainly Ian. Given the research that's been presented and some views and perspectives and maybe ideas, particularly in Right Tree, Right Place, how would you see this information or research translating into our work programs?
So, yeah, thank you, Chair. As I mentioned earlier, what we'll do with Edgar now is spend some time unpacking this. And I guess it's important to recognise that in embarking in this exercise with the university, we wanted to bring the independent, free-thinking, if you like, spirit of the university into our work. And the idea was that we would have things put in front of us that challenged us. It's nice to be in a space where people are telling you the things that reinforce the things you're already doing. But actually what we really wanted is some thought-provoking, challenging items that would stimulate conversation, whether it's at this table or with our staff. So that's very much the intent of the work that Ed is producing for us. It is the right question to ask, and I can't answer that right now, but that's what we're going to do, is work through and ask the so what questions. Does it change the way we work? Does it change the way we communicate? Does it change the skills and types of people we have working for us? I don't know. I would just offer a view that, in my observation, spanning close to 30 years of working in the environment space, it's typically, in the work I've done, I've had earlier conversations with rural women on these topics than I have rural men. It's typically been women who have approached us to want to do these projects, and that's a gross generalisation. So I therefore go to the thought, well, okay, how do we maximise that? If that's a thing, how do we maximise those opportunities so that we can get that engagement? And if it means that the woman on the farm creates the opportunity for us to get on through the farm gate and have a broader conversation, then great. Doesn't always have to be, and there are certainly plenty of very, very proactive male farmers who approach us as well. But so the question is really, if we agree with this and we see the opportunities, how do we best use them? And so, like I say, if this challenges people, then I would say good. That's certainly what it was intended to do. And this work should challenge us all. And it might be at the end of it we kind of go, there's nothing much we can do. But I think a deeper examination of this with Edgar will probably reveal some subtleties in the way we work that will.
Yeah. Can I suggest with Edgar's next series of reporting that an extra section be put into the paper around how that translates to what we do in our work programs? And it doesn't have to be very specific, but it'd be good to understand how that piece of work fits into what we do on the ground, or how it could, and what we can work towards in that space. Yep, thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Williams.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was intending to sort of sit and listen to all of this and learn. But a bit like, well, what struck me, and it's a good part of the paper in a sense, is that I've always thought of rural communities as exactly that. They are communities of people, which happen to include both men and women. And so I'd never seen a sort of gender divide across environmental fault lines, or the other way around, an environmental divide across gender fault lines. But I think the benefit of the paper perhaps is to ensure that we realise that engaging with communities, we are engaging with both men and women, and that they may have different perspectives, and that presents opportunities. Is that the essence of it, do you think?
Yes. So to just unpick a little bit that undifferentiated model, because like you, hard-working, physical work, all your intelligence of men and women, totally, I get that. That makes sense to me. What we've got to say, both with more educated women, but with women allowed their voice more, that they do sometimes just come at that. So the argument in the academic world is that you and I could say, well, I've got on well with women, but you know the phrase, some of my best friend are Maori. That's often a signal for some fairly incomplete relationships. And so the same thing about gender. So you and me as men, to say that, everyone say, yeah, but you would say that because you're blokes. And so you don't get it because you haven't lived as a woman or been amongst women, even though you're very closely working with your partner or your woman in your area. So it's just raising that question in a slightly new way in this modern sort of farming world. So
Can I just follow that up with this specific question, because like Councillor Ormsby, I was interested in the right tree, right place context. There was a comment on page 19 of your report that right tree, right place is a HBR example that lends itself to this, quote, kind of application of women championing council programs. I couldn't quite pick from the preceding context for that statement.
okay.
Can you just paint a picture of how maybe women could be champions in the community for that type of project, if that's what you had?
Yeah. So I'm just saying that's something that Council's committed to, would love to see go up another layer or three. So important on a number of respects. Aesthetic, getting activists about animal rights, getting a whole lot of things that would achieve, plus secure soil. And so I was just wondering out loud, I'm not saying that it's failing by the men, I'm not making that argument, therefore women should do it. I'm saying, is there an angle that we could invite some woman or into just lifting the profile of it? So in a sense, their positioning as women, say, hey, this is some good stuff here, fellas, and so it just keeps moving what we want up another layer. So I'm sorry I wasn't quite clear enough.
No, it's good, that's fine.
I'll go to the board. Are there any questions or comments? Jackie?
Thank you, Chair. Pretty much everything's been said. Martin, you've pretty much covered the question, so I'm just going to leave a comment instead. Really enjoyed the report, really enjoyed your presentation, thank you. Back to right tree, right place. One thing I'd like to know is when we have our people at Hawke's Bay Regional Council going out to farms, are they extending the invite to farmer's wife to come and join in the conversation? That is something I'd like to know. And we'll see a progress on that. The other thing I just wanted to make comment on is that with Will, I think there has been a huge change in farming, and and these environmental practices are more considered, very much so, which is great. Again, it'd be really great to extend invites to Farmer's Wife, or they just become farmers. It becomes a business, it's a team, and I know, Will, you see that definitely, but not in all situations. On a recent field trip last year to Mark Warren's place, I was really pleased to see some women attending the field trip, but not many, still very much dominated by men. So again, if we can just communicate really clearly that just to get more women across to events and field trips that we're holding. Lastly, I was recently in the Waikato and I met a woman whose marriage had just dissolved and she was working a dairy farm on her own. I think it's really important that women are very much involved in all conversations on farms and anything that regional council is involved with, because in a situation like this woman, she's on her own and she has so graciously and confidently taken on the farm on her own, which I was very, very proud to see. So just a couple of comments from me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jackie. And can I just get Ian to respond to Jackie's question, please?
It's a really good question, Jackie, and look, I don't directly make the invites, but I don't believe that we differentiate who's participants in the conversations about right tree, right place. But I think, again, it raises a really, really good point. When we advertise or reach out to a farming unit about an opportunity, how are we doing that? And is it inadvertently or surreptitiously targeting the man on the farm rather than the woman? It's a really good question to ask, because from our perspective, we want a partnership at the table, not one or the other.
Thank you, Ian. Rick?
Ian's kind of touched on, got to where I was at. I have to say about your paper, I thought in writing this paper, boy, you're going to bump up against some pretty keen sensitivities. In a way, what you're trying to mix is Germaine Greer with Rachel Carlson to be the environmental thing and the feminist thing. And I thought, well, this is also challenging ground. But I think the issue is how we respond to it. And Ian's right. If we go and we start the conversation with the male farmer, then we've set the frame in which we're going to do it. If we go there and say, well, we want to talk to you and your wife, then you've kind of put the wife in the second place. So it should be, we want to talk to the people who run the farm, not distinct. So you're going to have to figure out how we make this, that we're open invitation to everybody to be there as equals. And it's not always, I think on occasions the female side of these decisions, their influence on it is underestimated. I'm reminded of talking to the Taranaki Regional Council about the riparian plantings, and in the early days it was seen as being just a waste of time and a waste of money, and you're losing land and you're losing that. But until people started to find that farms which were well planted were demanding a premium, and the analysis was that one person turned up, the bloke, to see how many square metres he had to put cows on, and the other turned up to look was where they were going to live. And the person who was going to live there, the farmer, they call it farmer's wife, she was demanding that they had a place which was quality of life. And so that changed the dynamic of it. So I think they had an enormous influence, not directly but indirectly, on the value of farms in Taranaki and on the planting processes. So I think we've got to keep these things in mind, and we've got to make sure we go back and work on how we make the introductions, who it's to, and on what basis, because then that will start to open up the doors differently. We'll probably fall in the trap of just talking to the bloke, and then we are down one alleyway rather than the other. So I think we need to think about that, and Ian and your team need to work out how we improve our communications with the opening gambit.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I've got two more to go, and you always put me under pressure in this committee, guys. The conversation is so interesting that I have to time limit everyone. So I've got Councillor Curtin, and then I'll go to Api, and then we'll close off. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thank you for the paper. I like all social science expositions. They're often shrouded in clouds of uncertainty, and you've certainly provided some today. But it's sort of finely distilled in my mind that the intent is to bring about a recruitment of women as champions, and I'm assuming to address the regional council priority issues. That's the distillation that I've come to. I'm not sure whether you intended another outcome such as inviting women to become farmers, or at that sort of level. I'm not sure what the goal was, and I guess that uncertainty is my comment here. Is I think the next iteration, if you're bringing back a paper, ought to be what are you trying to get to? Where are you going? So we've got a sense of the goalposts here. I've read the paper and saw the link to our right tree, right place scenario. That's clearly one objective we'd like to get across the line. I saw some regenerative farming changes of land use potentially there. I didn't see any climate change imperatives creeping into the menu of championing that we want to bring about. I mean, are there other farm practices that you'd like to influence? You touched on activism around animal welfare. I guess that's potentially a potential outcome, but where does it sit in priority? So, long story short, can we have the next iteration very clearly establishing that this is where we're going, this is where we want to take this project, these are the outcomes we want to achieve, and how do we link, for example, with our comms team to bring about that change? And picking up on Councillor Barker's comments, which were apposite for this, is that, are we targeting women who happen to be in a rural environment, or are we targeting them and their partners on the farm, or what is the context for that? So I'd be interested to know, bring all of those, if you like, goals and outcomes into a clear distillation of where you're heading.
Thank you. Some good comments there, Councillor Curtin. Uppy, over to you for a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Ngā mihi, Madam Chair, thank you. I had two questions, but Councillor Curtin's already addressed my second question around where are the opportunities for us to effect real change. And just want to speak in support of a great presentation. Edgar, and I have to say I was intrigued, and you had my interest around where this was, one, coming from, and two, going. So I'm looking forward to the next iteration of this report. But my question is to probably Tom, and that's with regards to this report indicates that we're looking for opportunities to grow. Yeah, you, Tom.
We don't have a Tom in the whare at the moment. We've got
Ian,
Ian. Ian's the lead on this.
My question to you, Ian, was do we have, with regards to fostering the conversation within the organisation and opportunities in that space, because you indicated that's where we're going to start, is there a CRM program that can help us to make some of those more practical changes that Councillor Taylor was referring to around, because those are if you like, they're not critical components of business operation, but they send very unique messages to the recipients, and they can be initiated with such simple things as some of the IT systems we have in the background and subtle changes. So do we have the necessary, I guess, supporting service to help grow in that space, or is it the conversation we're starting with?
In terms of IT support, I'd say it's variable. So we do, for example, in our catchment delivery area, we do have a CRM and we use it extensively, but we don't have a CRM, a complete CRM for the business. So that's a work on. And I think the question, my response to your question about the so what or the implementation of this refers to the earlier question around, how are we communicating and are we communicating in a manner that invites the partnership to the table? So I think that's the question that we need to go away and look at carefully and then ensure that our systems are supporting that.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you for all the commentary. It's been a very interesting presentation. Thank you, Dr. Gibbons. And can I please have someone move to receive the report? Councillor Williams, and second by Councillor Curtin. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Edgar.
That's great.
Good report, Edgar.
Haven't met with you yet. Right.
So we are now on to item 7, our Climate Action Ambassador and Work Programme. And just a congratulations to Pippa, who's joined the team, Desiree's team, in this position. So Desiree, when you're ready, I will hand it over to you. We have 30 minutes for this item, so hopefully the presentation will be around 20 minutes and then we'll have time for comment and question. Thank you.
Ata Marie Committee, thanks for having us. It's my privilege to introduce Pippa McKelvey-Sibalu, who is our new Climate Action Ambassador. She's, as Hanawai, as Councillor Ormsby has said, she sits on my strategy and governance team. Unfortunately, Pippa is at home isolating, so she is joining us via Zoom. There she is. My role today is really to drive the PowerPoint for her, and I've also been involved in developing the draft action plan, skeleton action plan, that we're asking for feedback on today. I won't steal Pippa's thunder by going into her background, but other than to say that we're really thrilled to have her on board. She's been on board for a month. She spent a lot of time connecting with the staff that we have on the front line of climate action in terms of virus schools, policy planning, catchment management, etc., and also externally with our TAs and others working in the space. Pippa is our first dedicated resource involved with climate action that you funded through the long-term plan. Yeah, I'll hand over to Pippa, who's going to run through some slides.
Kia ora, Desiree. Kia ora, Hanawai. Nā mihi nui kia koe mō tō manaaki mō tō rangatiratanga. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Hi everyone, thank you for having me here this morning, and I am sorry that I'm not there in person, but I do have a house full of COVID, so it really is better that I'm behind a screen today. So the purpose of me being here today is to talk through this regional climate action plan. But before we do get into that and we have a good chance to discuss that, I just wanted to take the time to introduce myself. I'm aware that most of you are meeting me for the first time. And then I've prepared some slides that will tie in nicely with some of Edgar's discussion about the Ipcc report. So I grew up in Hawke's Bay. A lot of my childhood was spent swimming in the Esk River, where my parents had a small farm, later kayaking in the Mohaka with the canoe club. And I make mention of those places because that scenery and the power of those natural environments is really what drew me to move home after a couple of decades overseas. So I moved back home in 2017. My undergraduate studies are masters in psychology, social and cognitive psychology, and most of my career has been in research, facilitating research, creating partnerships, and mostly or especially communicating research. Most of that work was in Europe, but since 2018 I've been research manager at EIT, and I am currently enrolled in my doctorate in public health through the University of Auckland, and my thesis looks at building community food security in Hawke's Bay, particularly around schools. My interest in climate action, you can't really pinpoint a time when it started. It's just been growing over decades, really, but it was particularly cemented by our experiences as a family. We took 18 months off when we travelled from Canada to Argentina in our van with our children. So not only did this really show us how, as a family, we could live much more simply and have a much lighter impact on the planet, but we also saw firsthand the loss of ecosystems all along that route. So from northern USA, the glaciers to the dry plains of Chile and Argentina, and we met with people living all down that coast who are already vulnerable and at risk of climate change. So that really brought home the message for me and the absolute conviction that we need to act now. And I'm just sharing this photo with you because these are my children, and I feel that it's our responsibility to tell them what we did when we knew. So to use a poor pun, but the lid could come down on that pot, and it's going to get fairly hot in there for the children who are going to grow up after 2050, or we could do something about it now. So on to the next slide with the IPCC report. This is really just a couple of slides to draw out key messages, I think, for New Zealand, for Hawke's Bay, and particularly for our work at the Regional Council. So this is the Impacts, Adaptation and Vulnerability Report. The Mitigation Report will come out in about a month's time, Summary Report later in the year, and the Science Report was released last year. It has been signed off by 195 governments. So what that means is massive international support for the findings of these reports, but also it probably means that it's a watered down version and somewhat. So what the scientists, so when we see these words like cascading, compounding and aggregate impact, they're quite strong, but this is the publicly, politically agreed version, publicly acceptable. So this report, what's new in this since the fifth report is it's a focus on how we respond, how we uphold human rights, justice and good governance. There's integration across natural and social sciences. There's a recognition of the need for that. It assesses adaptation directly in context of sectoral or regional risks. And there's an acknowledgement that we need to engage with different forms of knowledge, including Indigenous and local knowledge. There is an increasing focus on social justice. And there's much more understanding of interconnection. So there's some great diagrams showing us how our ecosystems are all linked together, human health and the health of our natural systems. And there's a real focus on human well-being. So just to tie in with Edgar's discussions, there is mention in this report of women in farming, and there's talk of their mental load there, that they actually carry a lot of the load. When farming gets more difficult, it's off that pressure is often absorbed by the female in the household if there is one. So there is a bit of discussion about women in farming if you're interested. Next slide, please, Desiree. So I'm not going to read through this list, but just to identify, if you haven't found it already, there is a chapter on Australasia, chapter 11. These major risks to New Zealand come from chapter 11, page 2052. There's 4,000 pages. So that's why I'm highlighting where you may like to focus your attention first. Some things in that list that we may not be front of conversation at the moment is, for example, that our native biodiversity is not fire resistant and it's at risk of being replaced by fire resistant invasive species if there are extreme weather events and fires. Also, the focus here on heat, malnutrition and mental health challenges that will negatively affect health and well-being. Over there in the pink on the right, those are some extreme events that are listed in the report that occurred in New Zealand. Now you can see that most of them occurred in the last 5 years with our hottest year, marine heat waves, hailstorms and floods, and those are just going to get more frequent. Next slide, please, Desiree. So from this report, what can we take from it about what we need to do? So the report talks about the need to move from incremental adaptations to transformative adaptation. Others might say we need to move from rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic to actually changing the way the ship works. Adaptation and mitigation activities need to be linked. So that, I'm sorry.
Annalie.
There's a problem with the Zoom?
Yep. Sorry, we're just sharing all those on Zoom. Yep.
Okay. It's actually the slide prior to that, Desiree, if we can.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. So there's a recognition that we need to identify these synergies between adaptation and mitigation. So what that means is, for example, a good example of that might be planting trees on farm. Not only is that sequestering carbon, but it is also providing shade and reducing heat for stock in those extreme heat waves. So that's an adaptation, reducing risk and vulnerability, but also offset with sequestering carbon. So this third point, acknowledging climate, biodiversity and human society is a coupled system. That's really quite new in this report, acknowledging that all those systems need to be functioning well, and we can't have one without the other. Now, this concept that you've probably heard in the media of climate resilient development, there's a whole chapter on this, and it's a really good read. This is, it draws on wider knowledge, scientific, Indigenous, local and practical, prioritised partnership, it conserves and restores ecosystems. We need to involve marginalised groups, prioritise equity and justice, and reconcile different interests, values and worldviews. So then there's a whole section on how do we do that? What are the enabling conditions for this kind of climate resilient development? And I've chosen the 3 key ones here that are important for us. Effective governance is a real enabler for climate resilient development. Adaptation finance and nature-based solutions. Now, I probably can't highlight enough the need for adaptation finance. There will be a cost to some of these actions, but the cost of not doing it is greater. This is all from the report. Next slide, please, Desiree. So again, some of these messages have been widely taken up by the media, but every small bit counts. So a 0.1 degree of increase or decrease has real and tangible effects, especially on whether we're going to experience those cascading and compounding weather events. Adaptation action needs to increase across all sectors. So the adaptation gap highlighted in this report is actually largest in those lower income populations. That's where the solutions are not of the same magnitude as the issues. And that third point, we will require changes to our underlying values, our world views, social structure, political and economic systems, and power relationships. Those things don't happen overnight. So this is a really, a long-term view of it. What we need is water management, land use planning, food security, transform cities. We need to retrofit existing urban design, infrastructure, and land use. And to avoid this maladaptation, which can affect our disadvantaged groups in the community most. So an example of a maladaptation that they give is short-term solutions. For example, down in the last point there, they say irrigation infrastructure may reduce our short-term climate change impacts of drought, but maladaptive outcomes can't be ruled out from those kind of solutions in the longer term. Next slide, please. So getting to to our Hawke's Bay situation, how are we going to ensure a climate resilient future in Hawke's Bay? So just to stress, successful adaptation to climate change is not only essential for the economic resilience of our region, but also for human wellbeing, and that is a real focus in this Ipcc report. The common goals and narratives will enable our transformation and help align the activities of multiple loosely coordinated actors in the community. And my role, this recently created role, is to coordinate the development of a regional collective action plan with documented and specific milestones. So we'll have a look at those now. Next slide, please. So this is really when I, got into my first day of the job, and we have this goal of carbon neutral for the region by 2050. I needed to know, well, where are we now? We all need to know, where are we now? How are we going to get there? But we need to know where we are, right? It's the basic of navigating systems. So what's our starting point? This data comes from Stats New Zealand. I think it may be being cut off down there where the data is sourced from. But this is the best estimate that we have. They give us a regional breakdown. It's 2 years old, so 2020 will be released in April. But this is the best estimates that we have of it at the moment. Now you can see in the middle there in the dark blue, primary industries, roughly 74%, roughly 3/4. Our industries, goods producing industries, about 10%, households about 10%, which is mostly made up of transport emissions, and services at about 6%. Now, I just want to mention that these categories, the names of these categories, are what Stats New Zealand give us. But another framing of these emissions, where they're coming from, would be that agriculture and horticulture, which are the lighter blue on the outside there, which account for 72% of our emissions, that's actually food production for our community. So that's just another way that we can frame it, but I've used the categories from Stats New Zealand. Next slide, please, Annalie. So this graph here that I've put as a comparison is where our community think Hawke's Bay emissions come from. Now, this data comes from the Climate Crisis Survey from 2020, the survey that we did. And you can see some massive differences there in between what's actually our emissions from the Stats New Zealand inventory and what our community thinks. So some really big dissonances there in between those kind of measures. And so I think that this is highlighting the need for public awareness, engagement and knowledge building.
Hey,
Next
Pippa,
slide, please.
Pippa, could we just move on to, we've got the work plan here. I think our committee members are really interested in what next and what the work plan may look like.
Yeah, so this is it. Thank you, Hanaway. This is it. So you've got the paper. This is the 3 work streams, collating and communicating what we already know, what we already do. So some more work like what I've just shown you a snippet of. Second one, gaining more comprehensive information. That would be the commissioned work to get some more scientific information about our risk and specific locations. And the third point of community engagement, partnerships and collaboration. There is just one last visual slide to show that, if we can move on to that one, it's just a visual slide to finish to show that this is like a roadmap. So at the moment, we have a goal of carbon neutral Hawke's Bay 2050, carbon neutral Hawke's Bay Regional Council by 2025. We need some milestones along the way to get there, and we need to some decisions about how we're going to get there. So those are my questions to you. I did just put a photo of Jane on the right because we do need hope in all of this. So it can feel overwhelming, but when we're Jane, so I just share that quote with you to finish on a more hopeful note. Thank you.
Thank you, Pippa. Thank you for your presentation and a lot of your introduction. We've had eyes over, so it's a good reminder, but I am conscious that we're really interested in understanding your work plan for leading up to particularly our long-term plan so that we can put something forward there. So committee members, what sort of questions do we have for Pippa around the work plan and what's proposed in the paper with the 3 work streams? I think it would be great if we can have a discussion around that. So who would like to go first? Councillor Barker.
My question to Pippa is that there is generally a pretty loose job description for this, and it is going to be you as the person who's in this job to make it more about you and what you do, because you'll be basically delegated this to do. So what I want to hear from you is what are you proposing to do, how are you proposing to approach this, because it is an enormous range of activities and it's just one person, you. So it must be firstly daunting, but put the daunting aside, you've chosen the job, put your hand up for it and you've got it. So what are you thinking about, how are you going to approach this? I want to hear that from you. Apart from getting out of bed and work hard every day.
Yeah, well, it's, like Jane says, you can't look at the big jigsaw puzzle, you've just got to look at the pieces that you're working on at the time. So I think that what I bring to it is that that engagement with ability to create partnerships and to collaborate, because this is not a job, this is actually not just a job for me, and this is actually not just a job for the Regional Council. Our role is to catalyse collective action. So that's what I'm hoping to bring to it, that it will be a whole of community response. I know that the journey in different parts of the community is going to be different, but we have some real champions in our community too. So putting those people front and centre, we have champions as individuals, households, businesses, promoting those to bring other people along.
Thank you. Desiree, would you like to respond to that as well?
Yeah, sure. Just to say that there was, Pippa's role could have sat in multiple places across the organisation, reflecting the fact that we are doing a lot already, and her role is really to try and connect those dots and tell a better story about what we're already doing in lots of places. And so that's why we've ended up putting it in the strategy role, so that can sort of cover all groups. And I hope that Pippa doesn't feel like she's a lone soldier, like it is a whole of organisation will be in support of the climate action plan.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Councillor Curtin.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair, and
certainly welcome aboard, Pippa. We've been
Thank you.
eagerly awaiting your appearance for some time, so it's great to see you presenting today. I've got a couple of questions, and it relates to the work program. And I note, essentially following on from Councillor Barker's comments, where you're going to start eating this elephant, because that's the task in front of us. And I'm looking at work stream 2, and particularly it was good reading the Bay of Plenty and Waikato Regional Council's greenhouse inventory, and I'll be looking forward to an update and development of our own regional wide. But taking that to its conclusion, I mean, the obvious large emitters, the agriculture sector, something close to 50% for Hawke's Bay, the second biggest transport, and the very unpalatable, hard to sell solutions. One, for the agriculture sector, reduce stocking rates on land, and for the transport sector to reduce vehicle transactions, both volume and intensity. Using the example of transport, where an opportunity for the region to reduce its footprint by reducing speed has been opposed vehemently by leadership of the region, how do you change the perceptions and acceptance of the need to make adjustments and change of that nature, those big picture changes in behaviour and pattern and activities in the community?
I might pass it to Desiree if you can help answer that.
Sure. I'll give Pippa the first go. You haven't yet.
Yeah, those are really important questions, and we do have our Transport Manager, Katie Nimmin, who I've already met with, and talking about some of those same issues. There's some work by Waka Kotahi working with how we can change this modality shift. So it's actually changing people's opinions about public transport. In Hawke's Bay, we have a majority of people who have actually never used our public transport system. So our situation in a smaller city with people travelling greater distances is difficult. But Katie and I have met to talk about those kind of things of how we can encourage. It's a long task though. Sorry. So I'll pass it back to Desiree. It may not be specific enough for you at this stage, but I know that Katie Nimmin is also looking at this.
The only other thing I'd add is that Pippa has talked a lot about, and that's, I think, reflects her social science background, using social identity to, build a culture in Hawke's Bay that we value our environment and we're serious about reducing our emissions, and then that sort of snowballs into action. If you see other people composting, then you're more likely to compost, and it's that sort of, you build on a positive social identity to these actions. So in the past, through the work we did last year, it was, you'll remember the visuals were like Tomato Park Peak with Barron, and a lot of the research is showing now that it's that framing can be more successful and more enduring if it's as a positive approach. So that's sort of, I think, where Pippa will be taking us. Is that right, Pippa?
Yeah, it's bringing people along for the vision, sharing a vision of a positive future that they want to access. So that vision is transport that's inclusive, so that works for people who live outside of main areas, transport that is safe, those kind of things. And so we look after the more vulnerable in our communities and bring people along. We also have a key role, though, in our councils have a key role in deciding the public transport around our new housing developments. So speaking of Tamata, for example, the consultation going on to whether we can, or how high up we can build. I know that I don't think that we have public transport out there to that kind of destination. So when we are building new housing development, public transport needs to be a key consideration of that, of how people will get to their jobs.
Thank you. Councillor Foley.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just ask a question of staff first before I
Sure.
come back to Pippa, and it is paragraph 24. So, as everyone's aware, and Pippa's quoted it, the climate crisis survey that we did a little while back, and talks about how the action ranked of least importance by residents was support work with farmers and primary industry. And then it goes on to talk about the emissions from ag, and that we don't agree with the residents' responses, and so we're going to need to, do something about that. Is that common practice that we survey our residents to find out what they don't agree with our philosophies and then go about to correct that?
So Chair, perhaps I could, the team can certainly talk more specifically about the work they've done. In terms of, would we specifically seek advice from the community and then take a different course of action? Generally, probably the answer is not, but I think what is being proposed here is that there's probably a disconnect, and Pippa alluded to it earlier in her presentation, that there's a disconnect with the community between their understanding where emissions are coming from and therefore what action council might need to take. So the first step in the journey is providing that clarity and explanation around where the statistics point to, and I think if that work was done, the community may shift its view to say, well, actually, yeah, you should focus on the area with the highest emissions. But broadly speaking, would we ask and then ignore? No, that's not our general practice, but I think there's a subtlety here that makes this response a bit different, but I'm sure the team can add to that.
Sure, just I think it reinforces the point earlier in the paper that a lot of what we do is often hidden from the community, and so I think that especially the urban environment aren't aware of the work that we do on farms and the importance of it in terms of where our emissions are coming from. So just building, how important it is to build that general awareness across the community of the work we're doing and why we're doing it, I think is the point we're trying to make with that.
Yeah,
Okay.
can I?
Yeah.
May I just add a piece of information about that survey? So thank you, Ian and Desiree. But for your knowledge, that survey was 836 residents across Hawke's Bay. We have very limited demographic information about who those people who replied were. I think we have gender and age. So we actually don't know the opinion of farmers and landowners about whether they want us to be working with them. I'm not aware of a survey that we have done asking those questions. So, this is the 836 people who replied to the generalised survey, but there may be some work to do to know actually what farmers and landowners would like.
Is that sufficient, Councillor Foley?
Yes, I've
Yeah,
got a
just
follow-up
go.
question.
Follow-up question, yeah.
Yeah, so thanks, Pippa, for the presentation, and really enjoyed your summary of the latest report come out Ipcc, and particularly around the points of the synergies between multiple pronged approach to addressing climate change. So totally agree with that. So was quite disappointed, and then you came back to the pie graph of emissions, which totally brings the conversation back to cutting emissions, and this is where I think the issue in the survey is around perhaps what people's responses were in that, and I think Councillor Curtin summed it up. Agriculture emissions 72%. We've got to remove all livestock off the land. And if I also link back to Dr. Eka's presentation, he talked about the shift of focus to the soil and the understanding of what's going on underneath and the ability to store soil carbon. So I just, perhaps a few comments to that, but I wonder whether that's where some of the response in the survey is coming from, and also things like, all the riparian plantings going on, the native plantings and the shelter belts, and the fact that farmers can't utilise that in the current proposals being laid out by government.
Desiree, would you like to comment on that, or Pippa?
Look, I mean, I think that there's no proposal at all to remove all livestock from the land. This is, like I said, this is a framing of it. When we talk about primary industries emissions or horticulture emissions, that's food production. We can't eat if we don't have horticulture and agriculture. So we actually need to be working at more innovative ways like regenerative farming. There's certainly the review of the system and the proposal for different planting and the emissions trading scheme are being worked on and need consultation and need to be studied for how that will affect our farmers. But I don't think that there's any notion at all in the Ipcc report or in any of my work that we would be removing all livestock from land. We need to work how to do that in a future-proofed way so that the emissions can stay under a level that ensures a livable, those are the words of the IPC, is to secure a livable future for everyone and all other life systems on the planet. So there's offsetting, but there is a need to reduce emissions.
Thanks, Pippa. I'm going to move to Councillor Williams and I'll go to the screen if we can keep our questions quite specific as time is going on. Thank you.
Yes, I understand that, Chair. I want to ask two questions that are specific, but I do wish to reserve a minute or two for some comment, whether that's now or when the paper's received. Can I leave
Yes,
it with you?
leave it to the paper received. Thank you.
Okay. Look, Pippa, just absolutely delighted and thrilled to have you on board, and I'll come back to that in my comments. My questions are twofold. One, in an ambassadorial role and within a community and population that is overwhelmed in just getting through the day, with immense challenges around costs of living and currently COVID and things, how do you capture the imagination, do you think, to affect behaviour change? What sort of techniques have you been thinking about to sort of change behaviours?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question and it is front of mind, but I think that this is a constantly changing space, and that the key, one of the key differences that I pointed out was this focus on equity and inclusion, and that that we have communities who will be more vulnerable. So that we're not all going to be equal in the climate change space. If you look at our floods in November 2019 in Napier, you can look at the communities that were most affected, and those people in those vulnerable communities may not have insurance, may not have another place to stay, those kind of things. So I think that when we help with communication to show that those communities are more vulnerable, that also becomes something that helps them to realise how important it is. But thank you for that question. It is an ongoing concern.
Thank you. And my second question was, you mentioned with reference to the Ipcc report, you said you couldn't understate it or you couldn't overstate it. I don't know which. Adaptation finance and what a challenge that is. Could you give an example in a regional context for Hawke's Bay of what adaptation finance challenges you see in front of us? Just a couple of examples.
Can I ask Ian or Desiree for that? I feel like, because I'm new to the council,
Sure. I'll go to Desiree first if you can answer.
Well, perhaps in the context of the report, Pippa, the type of adaptation finances that the report.
Yeah, okay. So restoring ecosystems has a cost. Seawalls have a cost, as you well know. Changing our transport system will have a cost. Creating systems of, they talk about a 15-minute city in the report. So those kind of things where we put services that people need closer to where they live and ensure that they can get to their places of work or places of need, their hospitals, those kind of things, by low emissions means, that can have a cost in the short term.
Thank you very much. That's what I need.
Fantastic questions. Thank you, Councillor Williams. I'll go to the screen. Jackie, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. All right, kia ora, Pippa, and welcome. Gosh, I don't know where to look on the screen. Everyone's all over the show. You clearly bring a lot of passion to this role, so thank you for your presentation. It's great to have you on board. And thank you, Desiree, too, for your comments. Just one thing that really stood out to me in the report was, first of all, sorry, my screen's just closed. Education is key for all of us. But one thing that really stood out in the report to me was that in our 2021 survey of council staff, for those who participated, 70% had never attended a climate change workshop or any training. Now, this is just a comment that, if we are to be leaders in this, and we want to achieve our carbon zero by 2025, then it is really important to see council, all of us, embrace sustainable living and have a really good knowledge of climate change. So the comment from me is, I think there's something I would really like to see is more training across all council staff, and we actually live by it. Thank you.
Very good suggestion. Thank you. I'll let Desiree respond to how that can happen, how it may look, and when that may happen.
Sure. So that was it's a small sample size, but we think it is pretty consistent because those that are probably most interested in climate change are the ones that would have answered the survey. So a lot of my team's strategy and governance is about building capability, whether it be in project management or in governance or report writing. So this is another thing that we would like to build with our subject matter experts, a kind of a consistent messaging that they can understand climate change themselves and then take it out to their engagement with the community. So PIPA does have some ideas about how we could run that. It's just a very early idea, so we support, I thank you for your support for that, Councillor Taylor. And PIPA, I don't know if you wanted to talk about the Common Cause Australia offering.
No, the link is in the paper. They run framing. It's really about framing messages, and there is also training more in climate change knowledge. That I don't think I put the link in there. So Desiree and I were talking. This came out of my meetings with different staff that they were asking for more knowledge. So yeah, thank you for your support for that.
Okay, thank you. I've got Charlie and then Craig.
Yeah, kia ora, Papa, welcome aboard. In your presentation, you talked about the adaptation gap. Can you just explain to me maladaptation?
So maladaptation might be things like, I don't know if I gave this example, that a seawall being created is going to protect the homes immediately in the vicinity of that seawall, as we well know, but it may have effects on the tidal areas, the wetlands behind, that then are no longer performing their function of absorbing water for floods. So you're actually moving the problem, probably temporarily, so in time, but also geographically.
Are those your questions, Charlie? Can't hear you, Charlie.
Nodding.
Oh, couple.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Craig.
Thanks, Chair. More questions for Ian or Desiree, and welcome, Pippa. I just worry that we're creating an impossible task for Pippa in the breadth of her introduction and those reference points that she's using. So have you considered any more focus or description to the scope of the job that we're asking? I do appreciate it's an ambassadorial role, so it's hard to kind of define that, but particularly the local actions, the actual actions within Hawke's Bay or across Hawke's Bay, which we can see progress on and see how it's working, the things that we've asked Pippa, or at least this role, to fulfil. That's my first question. If you just want to address that, just alongside your comment on para 10 in our report. This phrase keeps coming in a lot of our papers. And this one, it says, towards this council achieving its goal of being carbon zero by 2025. So for a start, that's net carbon zero, I presume, but we're already carbon positive. Because of all our carbon assets, yet we don't have a carbon policy, which we discussed in early meetings. So can I just pitch that one up to Ian or Desiree, just the context there, and then there's another point I want to raise, Chair.
Yep, thank you. Desiree?
So the first question around, I think it's around capacity. It is a big job, but we have sort of designed the work plan to be a journey with the near term goal of having a regional plan in place sort of middle of next year. We think that's doable. There's a few, pieces of that puzzle that we're going to outsource on the way there, and it's really about bringing people along so that when we do have a strategy, it is a regional strategy with buy-in. We will be drawing on the expertise from across the business, so it won't be a one-man job, but one-woman job.
Cool. Desiree, I've got James. James has just joined us and he's put his hand up. James, would you like to jump in here?
Kia ora koutou. Look, my apologies, I haven't been listening to the entire discussion because I've been in another meeting, so it may have already been covered. But as Desiree alluded to, there is a fair bit of outsourcing. In approving this role, Council did approve in the long-term plan $100,000 of operating budget to support the individual as well. And we had some carry forwards that were approved by Council from an underspend at the end of last year. So in this current financial year, we have in excess of 100,000 and then 100,000 from 1 July as well to procure the services of other parties. They will be producing those technical reports that are referenced in the paper, as well as a fair bit of internal support time from the likes of our communications team. And so, yeah, as Pippa, I assume, covered, there is the partnership with the territorial authorities who have some dedicated staffing resource, and with the wider community as well that we'll be looking to mobilise. So it really is a team effort. It is a fairly ambitious work program, but we were very conscious that Council was looking for that in this role, and it will be a build over time. And I think we can expect next long-term plan for all the councils in the region. There'll be proposals to scale up the activity even further. To the question around the council being carbon positive, yes, we are, certainly in terms of the NZUs that we hold and are accruing through afforestation annually relative to our headline emissions. What we haven't yet accounted for is the full scope of potential emissions that arise from the work of the Regional Council, which could, go into whether adequately the bus fleet's emissions are fully being accounted for through NZUs on petrol or diesel, if you like, as well as grazing on our lands, etc. We think that we probably are carbon neutral or carbon positive already, but we just need to be absolutely sure of that before making any claims, and that will then feed into obviously our carbon policy and how many NZUs we might sell for revenue purposes that then are surrendered by other parties and not available to offset ours, or how many we hold kind of in perpetuity, if you like, to offset the ongoing emissions for the organisation. So that's just a bit of work to do. We think certainly that 2025 is readily achievable for HBRC to be carbon neutral or better, but we've just got to go through the work on that.
Kia ora, thanks for your response, James. And Craig, you had a second question.
Yeah, part of my first one wasn't addressed actually, the bit about net or gross. So can we just please, any papers refer to net, because I know that's what James was referring to there. To see another point to pick up on what Pippa was talking about towards the end there, but basically it was efficiency of land use. And effectiveness, sustainability, etc. Because the graph of the carbon output emissions, across Hawke's Bay from stats, etc., it's great, but actually it begs the next question, of course, is the efficiency of carbon emissions. So, for example, a bus, some may argue, is a whole lot more efficient than 40 cars with 1 people in. But of course, much of our bus fleet drives around empty, virtually. So it's not at all efficient use of carbon. So can I just ask again, or ask for Desiree perhaps comment, because this is a strategic question, in that will we be looking at the efficiency of use of carbon emissions, etc. Having said all that, I realise we've only got one person in this role. It is bigger than being heard, but it's in the paper, so I'll ask the question.
Desiree, if you can answer it, otherwise we can have it as a follow-up item.
Yeah, I would just say that will definitely be picked up in the technical pieces that we'll be procuring in the inventory. The methodology will look at the efficiency of emissions and use.
Thank you, Desiree.
Thanks, Chair. I'll make comments on the receiving of the paper too, please.
No worries. Are there any other questions, specific questions? If there are not, I have Martin here wanting to move. Do I have a seconder to receive? Councillor Curtin. So I will open it up to you, Councillor Williams, for comment.
Thank you. I'll try and be brief. It's not long until 2050, so we need to act with pace. And just on that, can I just say, 30 years ago, I was sufficiently motivated by this topic, having completed an honours year at Massey, learning about climate change to the point where, supporting the establishment of the Green Party and standing for that party for Manawatu, I was actually of the view that what we really needed to do was storm into the United Nations in Brussels and insist that they shut down all the oil fields on Tuesday. So there are a lot of people in the community that feel like that, and there's a lot of latent or build-up frustration at the impotence we face as concerned members of the community, or even in leadership roles, at the inertia and intractability of this problem. But I think it is really important that we don't, having declared emergencies and things, run around like Mr Mannering, saying don't panic Mr Mannering, and we're actually measured in our response. So I think one of the most important parts of this work plan is actually in the second item, which is actually a point that Councillor Foss picked up on. Where are the biggest gains? Where can we make the most meaningful impact as a region, and focusing our scarce and precious resources on that? So I'm very encouraged by that aspect of it. I am equally of the view that this is absolutely core to our strategic objectives, one of which is to take a leadership role, not just as to our organisation, but for the region to achieve a net zero carbon by 2050. And I see the ambassador role catalysing, I think, as you put it, PIPA catalysing collective action through champions is really the only way, a bit like catchment collectives with water, that we're going to do this through that social ecology. So fantastic, really excited. I am interested in where Kotahi will fit within all of this, and setting the blueprint alongside a strategic plan, so that if we have 15-minute cities and those sorts of things, and we've got an arrangement of people spatially relative to workplaces, so that our public transport and active transport can work. And can I just, that was the principal comments I wanted to make, just in response to a couple of things that have come up. I think the point that Councillor Foley touched on is a pushback from within farmer communities around the idea that farming is yet again under threat. Can I just say that I actually think there's some good news there. Reading the Climate Change Commission's report, it's not about clearing farms of stock, it's actually about productive efficiencies. It is about everything we're doing through the Future Farming Trust and regenerative or common sense farming, as Mr Belford likes to call it. Everything that we do with water quality plans to reduce our water quality impacts will have a profound impact on our emissions profile as a region. So we're already in that place. Do not fear, farmers. The journey has already begun, and it's exactly the same methods. And in fact, the reduction in stocking rates are not severe in terms of what's required on a demonstration pathway. And it's all about technology, so that you're channeling your inputs into production of meat and wool, meat and milk, I might say more usefully at the moment, than into polluting waterways. So I just finally couldn't help but take the bait from Councillor Curtin as to State Highway 5. I do think we need to avoid getting that issue tangled up into this. I'd be interested in the relative cost benefit of an 80k versus a 90k speed limit from Te Aroto to Tarawera, for example. And the evidence that I'm hearing is that, in fact, your emissions are worse with trucks struggling up a hill from a low base than if they were able to arrive at the bottom of that at a higher pace using the momentum from the hill prior. So again, it's a matter of ensuring the efficiencies that Councillor Foss talked about in our response. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Been very liberal, so Councillor Curtin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm pleased Councillor Williams took the bait because we haven't seen that evidence, and we need the evidence to show Is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Wherever we go, whether it's, with Councillor Foley correctly points out, if we're going to do stuff in the agriculture sector, at the first blanch of this, we see our biggest emitter, but what is practical, what is reasonable, and is it real? So that's important. Similarly, in transport, you know, what's real, what's imaginary, that rises at it, and we just haven't seen that level of detail. So I'm hoping that the ambassador role, Pippa, and again welcome, that we do take that seriously. For example, should Pippa sit around the leadership table of our mayors and chairs and have an influence there. I would point out again, putting a bit of bait out, a bit of chum down out over the side of the boat, is are we coherent within our own policies and approaches? Are we getting it right? And I'll give you a few examples. Let's look, for example, at the decision we're about to take to invest 15 million in holding the sea back when the sea will beat us eventually. We're looking at 30,000 odd truck movements across the region, the emissions that come from that, and so where do we sit? What's the coherence of our own policies when we do that? I put the challenge out around the transport sector. I'd like to see the numbers that say, what if we reduced our speed to 80k right across the region? What does that mean? Are we prepared to do that? That's the sort of equation I'd be interested to know. So the role of Ambassador, finally, Madam Chair, we ought to integrate to have established at all forum that are relevant. I'd like to see a roadmap for the Ambassador to say, in the limited time and space that Pippa has, what are the best tables for her to sit around? Who are the people she should influence most? For example, should she sit around the road transport table? And I note the impact of forestry on our emissions, and I wonder what fora our ambassador should sit in terms of influencing that particular sector of our community. So looking forward to, with some urgency, and I noticed we still call it a crisis, so in crisis thinking, let's see this as soon as possible. What are we going to do? How fast are we going to do it? And how deep are we going to push the ambassador role? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. For comment, I'll go to Will and then I'll go to the screen.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to sum up, perhaps to drive my point home, which was we need to get as Councillor Kern said, we need to get this right. We need to get the terminology right. Councillor Foss pointed out gross versus net, big difference. Pippa said the need to reduce emissions versus carbon zero, big difference. In agriculture, in Australia and America, farmers under certain management are proving to improve soil carbon and are getting rewarded for that. We're nowhere near that in New Zealand. Where we're at is still blanketing countryside with pine trees, and that's now been admitted that's perhaps not the best thing for us and for our future. So, yeah, just we need to get this right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Foley. Actually, I'm going to jump in here. Rick, I'll head to you and then the screen.
Oh, thank you. I just want to say welcome, Pippa, welcome. I think I said at the beginning that you have an unenviable job. It's everywhere, everything, and it's just you. We can't be seen as having undue haste here on this subject. If we've employed one person, I thought we should have had more on this because of the size of the task. We can't be seen as have been panicking because we have a very leisurely response to having declared a climate emergency. As you can see from listen from the views around here, there's varying views around this council table about climate change, and you're going to get mixed messages. So you've got a challenge here to build a vision or a plan which brings a sense of unity around this table on the pathway forward, and it will also be a challenge for you to build a plan and a vision which will bring the executive team together. And then the third tier of this is to build a vision and a plan which will bring the community together. So you're going to have to operate at 3 levels, and it's going to be a challenge for you. I'm sure we're all here to help, and we've all got our own point of view, but can I say this to you? You'll encounter some turbulence. There'll be no heat in it, if I can use that pun. People will be pushing and shoving to try and get their particular views met and get preeminent, and you'll have some turbulence. You'll have to navigate your way through that, but there will be no ill will in this. I think people are all genuinely saying this is the right thing to do. So keep a positive attitude. All the turbulence you'll incur is because people want to do things. It'll be at a different place and direction, but you're going to have to be the person who draws it together. So draw yourself up and see yourself as a leader in this, not just an ambassador to do things for others. See yourself as a leader in this, in that you're going to lead this group forward. So you're going to have to exercise leadership capability here as well, and don't be afraid. Push and shove, we need it. So welcome on the team, and good luck and best wishes.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Councillor.
Councillor.
Councillor Foss.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks everybody. I still can't move away. I've got Councillor Curtin's burley bomb on the side of the boat there, and it's just such a balance here coming across as a finger-wagging organisation telling people what they shall and shall not do, and trying to deliver upon the aspirations that we all have in regard to climate change. And as Rick just said there, generally they're pretty lined up. Actually, I think we just have to be careful of the rhetoric we all use. But one thing can I just leave on the table? I am very involved in a carbon company, which is doing great things around the world. But the faith that we have, or at least can I remind the council of my interest in faith in people, consumers, and the pricing or the demands of consumers wanting to purchase only increasingly sustainable, climate-friendly products, supply chains, etc., etc. We should never underestimate that across our area as we perhaps explore different ways of rewarding carbon efficiencies across our region in our next long-term plan, insofar as rebates are concerned, etc. But that's for another day. Again, Pippa, welcome, and look forward to catching up with you in person at some stage.
Thank you, Councillor Foss. Api.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just reiterating the no mai haramai to Pippa and our team, and extending an opportunity to the Office of the Pou Whakarai and Pippa to coordinate meetings with the 9 PSGEs and identify which of them already have climate change personnel and how we can coordinate over time as we get there a good region-wide focus across a number of organisations, both local government and iwi. So nō reira, nau mai haramai ki runga e te ruma, and kia kaha mō tō mahi. Kia ora.
Thank you, Api. Councillor Lambert.
Yeah, I totally support all the comments so far. I particularly like the comment made by Martin about catalysing collective action through champions, because and like Api was saying, the PSGs, they will need a heads up on this as well. And I can see that in our own district is that only those of us that are connected with committees like this are learning about these things, when it's, in fact, it's going to take the whole community to do it anyway. So this is going to be a long road to get down and share the knowledge, which I see is a big part of the plan. But yeah, I think we'll all be willing to help Pippa. So just give us a steer in the right direction and we'll be onto it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Lambert. And the right of reply, Councillor Williams, if you choose to take it. I'd like to have some last comments. And what I've gathered so far by this interesting kōrero is but it's some snapshots maybe, Pippa, for you to take away, because there's a lot in there to deal with. But we're looking at SMART, we're looking at leadership and exemplars, we're looking at multi-leveled coordination, we're looking at accuracy in terms of messaging and terminology. We're looking at unity, but for me, most of all, I feel excited about your role. So, nau mai haere mai and welcome. And I'd like you to come back on a regular basis to EICC to be able to update us, because you've heard how interested and, of course, how challenging this, our biggest environmental issue that we've got facing us right now. So, tēnā koe. So, all those who agree to receive Pippa's report, say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you, Pippa. Kia ora. Now we're on to item 8, and Chris, you've got a summary for us. We should have all read the paper.
Yep.
And this won't take 30 minutes. We've overindulged in the last item, but it was well worth it. So Chris, take it away. You've got about 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just invite Martina Groves up to the table to assist with any questions. So this is just a regular update on our IRG package of projects, and I guess the segue from our climate challenges is this is a $30 million investment into the resilience of existing infrastructure to the effects of climate change. So very welcome by us and funded through the Crown as part of the COVID recovery program. So it's a regular format report. So in terms of the Heretaunga Plains, we're currently working at the Taradale Stop Bank, which is a high risk area for us, improving the resilience against a flood into Taradale, and we're looking at whether we let the Motio upgrade prior to winter. And then we also have 3 to 4 upgrades over the next couple of years, and we're currently reviewing the resourcing to deliver those, and it's very likely we're going to have to increase the resourcing of the team to ensure that we deliver those packages. The next significant project is the Upper Tukituki gravel extraction, which has been an issue for decades now, so it's great to be able to find a resolution. We've let our first 2 contracts for about 120,000 cubic metres of material, which are now underway, and we're due to go back out to the market later on this month for the next tranche. So we're well on our way of delivering that, and what we'll see about every 3 months, another invitation to the pre-qualified contractors to go through a competitive process to remove the gravel from the identified areas. So that's up and running, which is fantastic. The third project is the State Highway 50 Waipawa erosion, which is now pretty much complete, and we showed a video of that project and some of the social procurement practices at the last meeting. So our one activity there is to do a closeout report for the IRG, and then our plan is to cease reporting on that to this committee, because effectively it's done and dusted. And the Wairoa River Parade erosion work is again substantially complete from the engineering works and the construction, and we're just now into a planting program and working with the local community how that can integrate into some greater aspirations around the river. So again, mostly complete. Just wanted to highlight there some of the activities we're doing through the social procurement, particularly with Waiheke Kaitiaki Rangers, utilising contractors who employ staff through the Ministry for Social Development, and importantly upskilling and training contractors and consultants through various training workshops. So that's really valuable to see, that we're just not going to the cheapest price, but how we can provide meaningful employment through the community. And lastly, just really highlighting in terms of our own progressive procurement toolkit that was developed as a regional initiative, that we've been sharing that across the river managers across the sector. And we were taking a leadership role in helping other regions with their social procurement outcomes. That particular activity is on hold as we have the vacancy in the manager regional projects, and we're currently recruiting for that. So that's the high level headlines, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yeah, sure. I might start off there. In Project 3, with nearly the closing out, so congratulations on that project. Just a few comments on what made it such a successful project. I mean, it's on time. I'm thinking it's on budget.
Yep.
And you've got the social procurement laid in there as well. So just a few highlights as that project's closing out would be great.
Look, the highlight for me was our ability to respond to the government's funding.
Mm-hmm.
So by having the works group as an in-house contractor, effectively we were able to direct their resources straight into this project, and literally within months of signing the contract, having done the bulk earthworks of that project. So to me, that's really handy to not necessarily have to engage with the contracting industry, which is very busy at the moment. That's allowed us to get straight into it. And two, the engagement with the Kaitiaki Rangers and with the plant, both the native and the pole planting, again, an opportunity to upskill. And we saw some of those stories in the video last time about particular people being upskilled and then taking those skills onto the next job. So that's a few highlights from my perspective.
Right, well done team. Awesome. Committee members, do we have any questions for Chris? I mean, it's quite straightforward, it's an update, but Councillor Barker.
Yes, Chris, I'd like you to talk to me about the Narara River, and in particular, the first, I don't see it here, but it used to be referred to as the railway stop bank. And it was the stop bank that was first put in to get the rail into the Heretaunga Plains. That the government of the day wouldn't fund it until the local authority had convinced it had tamed the river. Yeah, what it was the Narara comes out of the mountains and then we previously had turned right, gone across the Heretaunga Plains and surged around the back of Hastings and in front of Havelock North and then out to sea that way. And they had to put that stop bank in to make sure it was secure. I've been there and visited on 2 occasions, been assured by engineering staff previously that it's all tickety-boo in good shape, but I'm still not so sure.
Yep.
So where do I see this on the program? I see that we've got the one here called Roy's Hill, but I'm not sure that's the one that we're referring to.
So that particular location is on our list because that is identified as a high risk. That's the old course of the Narara.
That's right.
Yep.
So where's that on this list here?
So I'll just get Martina to help me on that, on those particular cross sections.
Because I just think if it was seen as the prime weakness in our system by generations ago, I'm sure it still is a big weakness.
Yep.
So
that's precisely why it's in this high risk. So
where is it on here? I can't see it.
So it would be
Roy's Hill?
It would be either Roy's Hill or Natarawa.
I think it may be the Natarawa cross section 49 or 51.
Yeah.
And we are actually trying to fit the Natarawa one into this construction season. So we are hoping to actually get a contract award quite shortly. So so that would be one, and then Roy's Hill is the below sections. So that's another work we are planning to do next year.
Well, I wouldn't have thought it would be called Nata, but if you're convinced that's the old, well, they used to refer to it as the old railway stop bank because it was put in to protect the railway line, even though the railway line's nowhere near the area. But if that's the one, I just want to be clear.
I think
Sorry?
So we're all talking about the same place.
All right.
So that's the high risk area. It is in the program. It's programmed for next year, and it's primarily around the height and the slope stability of that site to be able to resist an extended erosion event. And we can maybe come back with a bit more detail on that in our next report in terms of the design and risks, for example.
Well, it's good. I just understand because, as I said to you, I went there some years ago, and I was sort of kind of reassured by the engineering people at the time that this was all okay. There's nothing to see here, Rick. But I've never sort of kind of believed in my instinct. Said, well, if it's always been a problem, it'll still be a problem.
So if you recall, the early stages of this project was to do some a model of all of the rivers. And understand where the risks were, and so this came up as one of our risk areas in terms of the crest height and both the bank slope of that particular stop bank. So that's why it's on the list.
Part of the work program next year. Thank you.
Good.
Councillor Foley.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I don't really have any questions. You guys do a great job of keeping us up to date, and so far seems on track. If I could suggest anything, just adding perhaps a final line about how we're going tracking to the timeline, because I know with the Ipcc there's a definite timeline there with the funding. Look, all I'd say is that as I've said before, this was all new to me when I started this role. Phone's been pretty quiet lately, but I've been to 3 different sites, not necessarily part of this project, but gravel extraction sites. And you think gravel extraction, big machines, what's the river going to look like when they clear out? But I've got to say I'm pretty impressed that apart from a pole to the side that they're still trucking away, the actual river just looks like it's in its natural state, and I've been pretty impressed with the job that those contractors are doing. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Is this a question?
Yeah, question. Can I ask a question of Councillor Foley? How's that wonderful resident of yours, William Wallace, feeling at the moment?
As I said, my phone's been pretty quiet, Rick, so I'm not sure. I think the rain's probably helped with the dust.
On the screen, do we have any questions? No.
Councillor
Hi.
Foss.
Yes, we do.
Oh, Councillor Foss, sorry. Yes.
Thanks, Chair. Three questions. Chris, just your paper, para 2, just talks about the overarching, I think that's the total, there's a 30 million project. But your paras 5, 11, 23 and 35 kind of allude to something forward thinking. For example, HBRC co-funding of 7.2 million is required. So can you just confirm that there's no further call on any funds because the amounts we all agreed are already in the long-term plan? It's just the way perhaps some of these sentences are written. Is that right?
That's correct. So the co-funding already exists within existing budgets.
But you did say that you need some more resource, and one of them, I presume, that's included in that budget.
So the resource is in terms of people, and that's funded out of that program. So we're not asking for any additional resources. We want to make sure that we can deliver $30 million worth of work over that 3-year period. And so our current activity is to assess, do we have the right team to be able to manage the volume of work? So that's where we're at.
Okay, thanks. So further to Councillor Foley's point about time, can you also include in these papers just that confirmation that within long-term plan budgets or whatever it might be? That'd be great. Just 2 general questions. Will any of the work, the various projects, particularly across Hiratonga area that you're doing there, will any of them improve the health of the karamu? And if so, how and by when? If you're able to tell us what kind of contribution they'll make.
So most of the work in the Hiratonga is on the Turaikuri, the Narararo, and the lower Tukituki. So I don't believe there'll be any direct correlation to the health of the karamu.
Thanks, none whatsoever. Okay. This finally, just we were just speaking with Councillor Barker there. The knowledge that was gained. There used to be a managed aquifer recharge, I think on Naroro or Roy's Hill site many years ago. Have you utilised any of that data as part of what you're trying to do, as we've learned that it's one linked up waterway right across Hiratonga? Or is that kind of extra to you?
So in terms of that trial, that particular managed aquifer recharge trial in that location was effectively finished up. Due to I think the analysis finding that most of the water was finding its way back into the river, so it's just sensitive as to the location of the managed aquifer recharge. So We still hold some land holdings around there. However, we no longer hold the consent for the water take.
And those lessons have been applied to the Central Hawke's Bay with Tom and that, I guess, in the other department, I presume.
So loosely some of the learnings, but there's a whole new technical piece of work behind that other managed aquifer recharge trial. Yep.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Could I have a mover to receive the report? Councillor Barker, and a second, Councillor Foley. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Martina. Thank you. Well, it is cup of tea time. Since we can't hover around over there, if we can get our cup of tea, bring it back, and we'll have a 5-minute break, and then we'll kick back in. Thank you.
5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Now we have Mark join us to present about the Ecosystem Prioritisation Program update. I'll hand it to you first, Ian, and then on to Mark for his presentation.
Look, nothing to add, Chair. I think you all know Mark, and this is just some really, really great stuff that we're doing that we thought would give you visibility of, because there's a lot happening. So, over to Mark.
I'm conscious I've come to EICC a couple of times now stating where we need to be and what we need to do, but not often do we actually report on the great stuff we're achieving. So thought I should actually put a paper together just outlining some of the stuff we're doing this financial year. I'm not going to go into the paper in detail. I'm hoping you've all had a chance to read it. But what I really want to do is just give you more context around the sites we're protecting and showing you a few pictures of those sites. And I can't reinforce enough just how blessed we've been this financial year through the Job for Nature project alongside QE2 and HBRC to protect not just the number of sites, but the actual size of these sites. So just a really quick recap on the Ecosystem Prioritisation Program. This came into effect in 2018 with a focus on, it was actually a prioritised approach to protecting high biodiversity value sites in Hawke's Bay. The budget's relatively small compared to the cost of protecting these sites, but we've had good success thus far, which has been essentially hinged on strong relationships with not only internal staff and other programs, but also external relationships such as QE2, and of course the land occupiers as well. So traditionally we've been fencing 2 sites per annum, and they're generally around that 10 to 12 hectares in size, and as you'll notice, the sites we're doing now are significantly larger. So the first site I just want to quickly talk to you about is Birch Hill. So this is a 28.5 hectare remnant, and the ecosystem type is actually naturally rare in Hawke's Bay. This will be one of the largest protected black beach remnants on private land in Hawke's Bay. It's quite significant in size, and as you can see from the pictures behind me, pretty awesome old growth forest in there. So they've done some monitoring. It's got bats and all sorts of other species in there, which is great. Alongside that though, the land occupiers are actually really engaged. So they retired this piece of bush a number of years ago. They stock fenced it. They undertake predator control across the farm, and as you can see on the bottom right there, that's a wetter motel. They've installed those sorts of things as well, but unfortunately, due to increased deer numbers across the region, the remnant's starting to go backwards. So we're coming in and deer fencing this in partnership with the Porongaho Catchment group, QE2 and the landowners, and it should have a really neat outcome. Second site in the Porongaho Catchment is Motumokai Bush. A slightly smaller remnant, and as you can see in the picture, it's quite elongated, but it contains 65 at least native plants that have been recorded, and you can see a lot of it's old growth podocarp forest as well, which is really exciting. And it contains northern rata, which is very rare in Hawke's Bay now. In fact, I believe this area is the last place it sort of exists, and some of it goes across into horizons. It used to be much more widespread. So this has a mature tree in it, really increasing the value of this bush. Very engaged landowner, but I just want to show you this. So a number of years ago, they fenced off a small portion of this bush through QE2, and they did a photo point. And 6 years later, that is the response.
Oh,
so you can see the impact that stock have on the understory of our native vegetation, and how they inhibit long-term the ability for those forests to regenerate, and then they ultimately go into collapse. Not only that, it provides a huge amount of habitat, it'll provide cooling, and you can imagine the carbon this is sucking up as well, which is something we don't account for. So great outcomes across the board. Oahanui Bush, this is a really exciting one. 130 hectare remnant. It's considered the largest, most intact piece of lowland forest in Hawke's Bay. It's really diverse, over 140 native plants recorded in it. And due to that diversity in old growth forest, it provides habitat for a number of species, including our long-tailed bat. This area has had a trust that's been overseeing the protection of this remnant for a number of years, and they've done an amazing job. Deer fencing has always been on the bucket list, but it simply has not been financially affordable. But through this project, we've managed to do that. So this is going to have real benefits for not only excluding feral deer, but also feral pigs as well. And they're in the process of looking at how they could actually modify this fence in the future to even exclude rabbits, because they're also having an impact. So onwards and upwards for this great remnant. Gillies Bush, another absolutely cracking remnant. 32 hectares, relatively large. It's one of the last, if not the last, remnant on the Maraetocha Plateau that's on the seaward side. And obviously those different environmental conditions affect what grows within them, so it's quite a diverse remnant. We recorded 61 native plants, but there's likely to be more. Unfortunately, as you can see from the photos there, it's relatively degraded from the stock browse, but as I showed you in those earlier photos, you can just picture there, particularly the top left, you probably won't be able to see that landowner in 10 years' time because of the bounce back and regen of the native bush, so that's really exciting. It also has a number of pest plants in there, which the team are now controlling. So Old Man's Beard is one of them, and that's that map in the centre left there. So each flag is a Old Man's Beard vine. So it gives you an idea of the work that needs to go in. Deer fencing these sites isn't the answer. You can't just deer fence it and walk away. It's continued monitoring and control of pest plants and other species as well. Finally, Pakuratahi Bush. So this remnant covers approximately 80 hectares. It's on Pampak land they purchased a few years ago. Now, within that 80 hectares, there's a number of open areas, grassland, of which, to Pampak's credit, they did not plant in forestry. They actually set it aside and have retired the entire area. So we're going to work in partnership with them and Kiwi2 through the Job for Nature and deer fence this entire remnant, and then working in partnership through the 1BT program and Mangahururu Tangatu hopefully, and we're going to plant natives within all those gaps, so again hopefully sucking up more carbon and getting biodiversity gains out of it. And alongside that, the importance of this remnant, it's actually really close to Napier. We have very few remnants of this size and this mature trees within proximity of Napier. So some of the catalysts, this project has been actually a catalyst for other opportunities. So the Kakabik recovery program are already eyeing the site up to create a second population where they can have, they can plant Kakabik to protect the genetic diversity of those plants, which is pretty limited at the moment. It's an important eco-sourcing site now. You can see Mari Taylor there filling her pockets with all the seeds. Finally, the Te Huka Waihanganga-esque River Care Group has also formed a partnership with Pampak in building a community nursery alongside Mangahururu Tangatu, where they're going to eco-source from this remnant, grow them in the nursery in partnership with the community, and then replant them within the broader catchment. So some really cool outcomes from the work that we're doing here. Finally, I just want to touch on a couple of challenges. So feral goats and deer are one of those. Unfortunately, feral deer in particular have been increasing, not just in our region, to be honest, across New Zealand over the last few decades. So a lot of the work Kiwi2's done in the past with stock fencing really neat remnants is now being eroded away from deer, jumping over the fence and eating, browsing all the trees. So you'll note in the paper the focus of our project next year is going back to existing Kiwi2s and deer fencing them to protect those sites from that. Another one is pest plants. I certainly acknowledge the hard work the pest plant team do in focusing on those pest plants, but the reality is there's still pest plants spreading across our region and they cause significant impact to our remnants. Species such as Old Man's Beard, Japanese honeysuckle, banana passion fruit, the vines, the environmental weeds, they can be really damaging because they will collapse the forest over time. So that's again why I just want to emphasise we don't walk away from these sites afterwards. We continue to work with the land occupiers to maintain these sites over time. And finally, just to touch on possums, look, they can have a devastating impact on these remnants, not just from the browse that they do, but they eat all our native species as well, invertebrates, the birds and whatnot. So having possums managed through the Possum Control Area Program significantly enhances the benefit of the Ecosystem Prioritisation Program. If we were to try and manage possums at site, incredibly difficult because of reinvasion. And not only that, you're getting the broader effects of possum control across large areas as well. So just really wanted to touch on the importance of that. And finally, one of the other main challenges, as noted in the paper, is actually constant increase of costs and materials, which seems to be across the board, and difficulty in sourcing some of those materials. So that has delayed some of our projects, but we are still within budget at this point and hoping to complete all of these projects by the end of the financial year. We should come close. So we will push really hard to do that. So that's it. Questions?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark. And just a big thank you to your team, the biodiversity and biosecurity teams, for their hard mahi on the ground and protecting our taonga species. So thank you for that. Committee members, do we have any questions or comments for Mark? Councillor Barker. Yes.
Just in general, I just want to say to you, Mark, I found your report really very good to read, very easy, and I want to just congratulate you, Ian, and the team for the quality of the reports, the style of them. I just like the fact that we've got a very clear-headed, the reason for the report, the executive summary, strategic fit. So all the layers of the onions are all peeled up there and clearly on display. And so when you read it, it's a structured read, and you're being led through this very well. These are good quality reports. Dramatic improvement over the quality of the reports from when I first came here. So great work, well done. Keep it up. I really like them. Great
point. Committee, Councillor Turton.
Very briefly, thanks, Mark, for the reports. I echo the nature of them. Excellent to see such a comprehensive overview and very, very succinct. I wonder if it's possible to add, see whether it's worth adding the regional park into this scenario. And why I raise that is you've got substantial investment by regional council, Jobs for Nature, 1BT, etc., going on around, in the first instance, around the Taipo stream. So to me, adding something in such close proximity to the city, big population, may be helpful in terms of articulating the message, plus inviting greater biodiversity into the urban area. Is that something we could look at in future, adding it to the list of priority areas and just reporting on that as well? I don't know whether that can fit or not.
Ian, would you like to respond to that?
Well, look, Chris can probably comment more, but from our perspective, happy that we provide an integrated, joined-up picture, but we'll figure that out.
Yeah, so those were really my comments. We're at a very early stage in terms of the Ipcc Regional Park, but it's a great platform for education and species recognition and some of the issues that are being faced across the whole region. So I think it's just adding that thread in at the appropriate time in the development of the park.
Fantastic. Thank you.
You're going to be deer fence?
Got to get to a master plan first. Martin. Any other questions to the board? Jackie.
Yes, please, Chair.
Yeah, Jackie.
Thank you. Well done, Mark. Everyone's very, giving you a lot of praise, which is great. It's really good work and really good to read all about your successes, which is fantastic. Excuse my ignorance, but I know we're fully budgeted out and we're doing great work on possum control, but it's really good you want to go back to those existing QE2 and do some deer fencing. We're good at keeping them out and we're protecting those sites, but I need a little bit more information on deer control, possibly with stakeholders as well here, not just Hawke's Bay Regional Council, but just a little bit more information on that would be great, thanks. Because fencing obviously is not cheap. Be good if we could eradicate more deer.
Yeah, so the complexities around managing deer are difficult, so they are widespread across our region and building. Currently, DOC are working on a national strategy, but unfortunately we have been waiting for that. Deer are difficult to control. You're literally restricted to shooting them. So we are limited by our control tools, and obviously we need to get a whole bunch of people on board to support that as well. But again, we do need some sort of national strategic approach that can then be applied down to a regional level, because this is a national issue. We simply do not have the resources to go out and control deer across the region at scale. I'm not sure if you wanted to comment any further, Ian, on that. I know you've been involved.
Look, that's a good summary, and just reinforce this is a national problem. DOC are working on a strategy. The person writing it is locally based, and I've certainly engaged with them. My colleagues who form a group called the Biomanagers are engaged in the conversation as well. For me, I just reinforce the point that I made in my opinion piece. This is a collective problem. It's not one that sits with regional council. It's going to require many agencies and many people working together to deliver it. Selves, DOC, MPI, the farming community, etc., etc. But the key bit is, well, what's the plan, what's the strategy, and then resourcing it. So my early conversations with DOC in terms of what's available to them to resource the strategy are reasonably limited. I could easily spend the entire budget of this council on deer control alone and probably still not have the desired impact if we were to take it on ourselves. So it's a big job. We're not shying away from it though, but the first step is we need to figure out what's the coordinated set of activities across all agencies and how's it going to be resourced and over what timeframes.
Thank you, Ian. I have a comment from Api.
Ngā mihi. Yep, thank you, Madam Chair. So just acknowledging those previous comments around the standard of the report, and particularly some of those social outcomes which have been achieved as a result of, like Ian was saying, collaboration within our community and getting partners to come and be a part of the journey. So fantastic. I'll go straight to my question rather than some of my other thoughts, and that was, what's a comment actually. Really looking forward to how the biodiversity team can work with our iwi groups in a part of that space where you're talking about everyone picking up their share of the opportunity. We are having conversations at marae by marae level across the Kakangaru corridor with MFE, DOC, MAF, MBIE, all of them to try and coordinate interpretation of Te Manawa Te Wai, environmental aspirations. And so over the next sort of 6 to 12 months to a year, the 2024 deadline, we expect that to take greater detail at a local level. And so really keen to hear from Mark and Ian around how we can coordinate your activities and hit some good points along that journey for our community groups, particularly in the iwi circles, so that we're informing them, one, of our great success, but two, of where we're leading and where we're going into the future. So ka pai on your mahi, and just a heads up that there are conversations happening at a local level around that coordination across all of those ministries and community groups, and so looking forward to an opportunity to tying in the direct work of HBRC into those conversations.
Yeah. Ian, would you like to?
So yeah, look, just one comment would be that to a certain extent that coordination has been occurring. So there was called a regional alliance, was its original framing, was set up by Department of Conservation to help coordinate the spend of some money they had, and it brought in the PSGEs under a DOC umbrella, and we've been involved in that, supporting that. So there has been a level of coordination, but certainly would welcome a deeper engagement on that in the right way at the right time.
Fantastic, thank you. Any other comments from committee members? If not, can I have someone receive the report? Councillor Williams, second by Councillor Foley. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thanks.
Next up we have Natalie join us for the predator-free Hawke's Bay closeout report. So we've got a presentation.
We do, Chair, and perhaps so just introducing Natalie, who's a biodiversity officer with our team. I don't think Natalie's been in front of you before. She's been intimately involved in the predator-free space over many years and presents to you a summary of the closeout report that she largely produced with contributions from many people. Just to note that this is a comprehensive chronological journey that's been set out for you in the report. It lays out, if you like, the record of the project. And so it's a really valuable resource for us from a kind of an end-to-end point of view around these predator-free projects. And will have broad value for practitioners and people involved in this game going forward. It stops short of providing a detailed insight into impact and kind of what next steps, and was never intended to do. So it's met the obligations contractually to Predator-Free 2050 Limited. And as the report notes, we are going to do another piece of work with the reviewer James Bowalder to develop that next steps paper. So just being really clear about what this is and what it isn't, and that we will bring you back in time that further examination of this work that will complement the work that Natalie's done. So Natalie will run you through a report, and Mark's going to support her in his questions at the end of it if you would like.
Great. Welcome, Natalie. Inviting you for the first time to a committee. And we have about 10 minutes for the presentation, if that's fine, and then we'll have questions and comments. Thank you.
Yep. Oh, kia ora koutou. Thank you very much for those introductions. So I joined the Predator-Free Hawke's Bay project about 6 years ago, and last year was given the pretty cool opportunity to write the closeout report for a decade's worth of research and learnings. So in July 2018, we launched the Predator-Free Hawke's Bay project, and that was as a result of successful funding from the Predator-Free 2050 Limited, then the newly formed charity arm of the government's Predator-Free 2050 goal. And as part of that contract, we had a milestone deliverable that I'm just going to read out now, which was for a comprehensive closeout report on Cape to City, Port City Otane and Mahia, consolidating all the pest management, research, education, cultural, habitat and project management learnings across the decade of the projects. This includes a strong focus on the innovation, eradication and social context. So this milestone really came from a desire to capture in a comprehensive single document all of the learnings from those three projects over the course of a decade, and the reference section of the closeout report probably gives you an idea of the research outputs from the projects, which I think by now amounts to over 70 contract reports and journal articles, so quite a comprehensive piece of work. And it was also intended to be a platform to consolidate these learnings for us to be able to pause, digest what we've learned, and determine the best path forward to a predator-free region. As we are all probably aware, biodiversity continues to decline despite our best efforts and despite conservation efforts to date. And the philosophy behind the Predator-Free project is to develop that step change in management that really gives us wide-scale, meaningful change, so that we can really start changing that biodiversity decline to an increase. And that's where the title for the report came from our 2017 conference that we held here in Napier. So the origins of the Predator-Free Hawke's Bay project really are in Regional Council's Possum Control Area program. As I'm sure you're aware, the low possum numbers across the region provide that platform to start to include that wider suite of predator pests. Port City Otane was launched in 2011. That was largely DOC-driven with philanthropic funding from the Aotearoa Foundation. And HBRC came on board as a partner as really providing a platform to start developing that template for predator control, wide-scale predator control in farmland, which a decade ago really was quite unheard of. It was also a really cool opportunity to start developing those collaborative relationships between organisations, so between DOC partners, HBRC and Manaaki Whenua were also heavily involved. So the learnings from Poutiotane were built on in Cape to City. We were very fortunate to be granted a second grant from Aotearoa Foundation and additional contribution from partner organisations. And Cape to City was really able to take these learnings to the next level and really start to develop an integrated template for biodiversity restoration, so including aspects such as education and habitat, as well as the species restoration and predator control. As I'm sure you're aware, in 2016 the government announced their goal to be predator-free by 2050, and we successfully applied to the first tranche of funding, which led to the launch of Predator-Free Hawke's Bay in 2018. So Predator-Free Hawke's Bay is the umbrella that covers the three projects, Poutiotane, Cape to City and Whakatupumahia. And at the time of launch, Whakatupumahia was the largest mainland possum eradication in farmland, so it's quite significant and still is, and on track to be delivered by the middle of this year. The benefits from this possum freedom is actually already being felt on the peninsula, with extensive regrowth on trees, fruit, flowers, and we've had rare species like kaka visiting, and we hope will call the peninsula a more permanent home in the near future. Some of you may have seen TV1 News on Sunday night, featured the Titi return to Mangaharuru. So I just wanted to highlight some of the internationally significant conservation outcomes that have come from these projects in addition to the predator control. So Korumachu here is holding the first Titi chick to hatch on Mangaharuru in Poutiotane. The parents of this chick were translocated from Hauturu Otoi, a little barrier island. And this is globally the most inland seabird site that has been successfully translocated to, and the furthest from the natal colony. So that little fluffy duffy there, as Kamasho Trevor has nicknamed them, and the the project team is adopted, we hope he will fledge this week. And I just wanted to highlight that this is a step along the journey to restoring Mangaharuru as the mountain that roars, as the seabirds leave and return each morning and night. I just wanted to talk a bit more in depth about the closeout report and how it's structured, because I am aware that it is a very large, comprehensive document. So structuring such a report was quite challenging. We've developed this infographic with our lovely graphic artist to try and help understand how it's laid out so you can more easily navigate to topics of interest. But it's really aimed at being a popular scientific text that will appeal to wide audiences, and particularly other predator-free projects. So I drew a lot of inspiration from Carolyn King's Invasive Predators in New Zealand, which to me is kind of the Bible of ecological history in New Zealand, and really gives context to the legacy that we're now left to deal with. So the report is largely chronological by order, grouped chronologically over time, grouped by project, and it's really trying to illustrate some of the internal and external influences that have shaped how the projects have developed over time. In terms of most of the research topics, I've based the structure on Andrew Byram and Matt Kaberman's 2015 report, which is a strategic roadmap for biosecurity and biodiversity research. So that's where those main topic headings come. And I also thought it was a really nice illustration of how the projects have also contributed to research nationally as well, and aligning with those national research priorities. There were additional topics like project management and project areas that didn't easily fit into this framework, so they are in their own sections as and where appropriate. So the closeout report has been peer reviewed by James Bowalder from Innovation and Strategy, and his peer review concluded that the report does fulfil the contract deliverables. We asked James to consider the report in terms of whether it fulfilled the milestone, whether the science was based on robust evidence, and the conclusions based on management learnings were reasonable and understandable. James also made some suggestions for improvement in the report, which is how that infographic came about, just to help readers navigate the report a little bit easier. We added some extra maps to help illustrate certain points and wrote the executive summary that you'll find in the attachments to the paper. So as Ian mentioned, James also identified a quite cool opportunity to come out of this platform that we've developed with a more directive piece aimed at potential investors. And so that's really based on the investment logic and outcomes. And the next steps recommended are for staff to work with James to prepare this shorter companion report that really highlight the benefits from the investment and key lessons for future investments in these type of projects. Because the closeout report really is a showcase of the outcomes from the project and from HBRC's investment, which I just want to note, HBRC has invested $5.2 million in the last 8 years in this project, with a total project value of just under $19 million, and which is where those outcomes, which is all the outcomes in the closeout report. So you'll have this in the back of your executive summary. It's just the acknowledgements page. You're not supposed to be able to read it. It just kind of illustrates the amount of people that have been involved in this project over time and the huge amount of efforts and passionate dedication, I would say, by everyone involved. And just really that optimism that we will be able to realise a predator-free region well before I retire, which is 2050. So thank you very much.
And Chair, perhaps just before we take questions, I don't think we should underestimate or understate the significance of receiving this report. As Natalie said, this is a combination of a long period of time, a lot of hours by a lot of people. It's a pity that we couldn't have a little bit more fanfare around it, but just it's it's an auspicious time. There are a lot of people who have contributed an enormous amount of work that this council, this region's led the nation on.
Yeah. And I'd like to tautoko what you're saying there in terms of the collaborative approach that it's taken. That's a success in itself, as well as such a comprehensive report that we do really value, and thank you for bringing it to us in such a way. So if I can throw it around to the committee members for questions and comments, because we do want to acknowledge the mahi. So if we have any, to Councillor Barker.
Just on that, when I finished reading this report, I felt like Ian, that for it to simply turn up here for a presentation of this really did undersell what's been done here. And I know we live in COVID times, but I would have thought a report like this should have had a public hearing. I would have liked us to have had something, public opportunity for the public to see this, hear from the people in Central Hawke's Bay, Hastings, Napier and Wairoa, to tell them this is what we're doing. There's substantial work here. It's good work. It's exciting work, and we're making improvements. I think the public would welcome an opportunity to do this rather than just this dry. It's on the website. Pick it up and read it for yourself. It deserves a discussion.
Absolutely.
I really do think it's something we should consider once we get through this COVID wave.
Yeah.
A roadshow to pull all of these pieces together, not just this report, there's other pieces around it, and say this is what the council's doing. And I'm sure a lot of people will turn up and say, we're really interested, thank you.
Off the back of that, Ian, can this be a follow-up item on what you would suggest are sensible ways to be able to promote and celebrate the report?
Yeah, so it's absolutely, Chair, and look, it was something that I had considered, but for us, we just can't host public events at the moment, but the time will come when we can. Our contract concludes on Whakatabumahi here at the end of June this year. beyond that, I think is a good time to, as Councillor Barker says, take it to the community and talk and celebrate the work that's been done. So we'll certainly reflect on how we best do that.
Thank you.
Great.
I've got Charlie, your hand up.
Yes, no, I'd just like to support what the chair's been saying about how we should probably try and give this a bit more impetus and promoting the efforts of those three major projects. Having seen myself a lot of the work that went into Te Pou Te Reo o Tāne by all the people around Maunga Haruru, was really an awesome combined effort over many, many years, probably before the start of Te Pou Te Reo o Tāne, when they were setting up Boundary Stream on the Maunga. And to see the collective result will be about putting all the seabirds back on the ranges where they actually used to live well over 150 years ago. As Natalie brought out, Maunga Haruru, the name itself is a tremendous beating of wings that could be heard from all the seabirds that inhabited the high places and spent the feeding time down in the sea. So it would be, and to see the TV promote the birth of the first chick on the range for well over 150 years, that's an awesome sight too. So yeah, I would say let's put this out in the public arena a bit more. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Charlie. Councillor Curtin.
Okay, thanks, Madam Chair. And Natalie, I do really want to echo Ian's words around your role in this. I recognise your commitment right through over a long period of time, so well done. I've just got a few questions because I had. Firstly, the project is funded through Predator-Free 2050. Is that correct? Is that part of that? Ian may be able to help me here. So it's part of that whole revenue streams that we're co-funded. Is that how it works? Regional Council?
So Natalie will know the details, but it's certainly Predator 2050 Limited Council Philanthropic Sector DOC. It's been a number of parties involved. All projects have been slightly different in terms of the way they've been funded.
Sure, but in terms of this report, Natalie, this was, it refers to a contractual obligation.
Yes.
So who's the contract? Who are the contractors?
With Predator Free 2050
Predator
Limited.
Free is the
Limited.
contractor?
The government agency.
The government agency, as opposed to the co-investors. Is that correct? Is that right? So it's directly with Predator Free. Okay, that's great. Just a question. I know your role with Biodiversity Hawke's Bay. Was there, and I don't see Biodiversity Hawke's Bay, if you like, in the frame. How has that worked?
So I'm a part of Biodiversity Hawke's Bay independent of council. So I don't sit on Biodiversity Hawke's Bay representing council.
Okay, but in terms of this project, was there a link to? I see James Bewalder and Co. sort of.
Yeah, so perhaps I can help. The projects obviously predate Biodiversity Hawke's Bay, so that's come after the setup of the projects. And look, it's fair to say that this is Hawke's Bay is a very small community in this space, so the people involved and all of these projects tend to overlap each other to a great extent.
Okay, sorry to pursue this. Diving also into the report itself, and I went looking for you had research priority 1, and then it jumped to 2, and then 4. What happened to the orphan 3 and 5?
So I matched up our research topics under the priorities. So for some of the priorities, we didn't have any that fell under that category, so that's why they're missing.
So it's just, the structure of the report.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. I noticed in the paper itself, at paragraph 15, HBRC as a co-investor alongside other enable the following output and outcomes: 35,000 hectares of predator suppression and 15,000 hectares of possum eradication. I went looking for the evidence and I couldn't see it.
So that's just the project areas. So, you know, Pou Te Reo Tāne, about 13,000, Cape City, about 26,000 together brings you to 35,000 of predator suppression. Whakatupu mahi is about 14,500. We just rounded up.
Okay, so that, I get that's within scope, but when I look at this, I'm seeing that there are 35,000 hectares that are now predator suppressed and 15,000 eradicated. And I couldn't see in the paper the evidence to show that had happened.
That'll be in the technical reports, so companioning it, won't it, Natalie? So and to be clear, the possum eradication, the Whakatupu mahi, the proof of absence will occur in June this year. So those final stages are being completed now. The 35,000 hectares of Poutere Aotane and Cape to City, all of that information will sit in the technical reports that accompany the closeout report.
Sure.
You're saying there were 70 odd technical reports that will cover things like, if you're talking about the technical methods to assess predator suppression, have we achieved it?
Yeah, well, it says that there's an outcome or that we've got the outcome. And that's a big story. We talked about how important this report was. So we can put our hand up and say we've got 35,000 hectares suppressed and 15,000 were eradicated, and we can say, job well done. Is that correct?
Yep.
And the evidence for that is where?
So, for example, if you want to look at the predator monitoring, and it'll be referenced in the closeout report, the tracking of what that's been over time from the trapping. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, I was looking for the table and the documentation that showed me the evidence for those two claims that we've eradicated and we've suppressed.
Did you mean the raw data, Councillor?
Well, either the raw data or a summary of the raw data, etc. So
the aim of the closeout report was not to replicate what's been written in those technical reports. So in the closeout report should really be just the summary of the main methods and conclusions that the reports talk about. So probably it would be a matter of finding the section. I suspect they'd be under priority 1 for Poutere Aotane and for Cape City.
Sure.
And we can match that up to the technical reports that will have the exact predator numbers, both that were trapped and that were monitored for remaining numbers.
So we can provide you those linkages if you want. We've got a website with all the technical reports on them.
Yes, they're
so
all on the Predator Free website. Yeah.
Go through the 70 odd journal articles and technical reports, and we'll try if we can to highlight the areas that
Sure, I was hoping to extract out of those to summarise. Here's what
I mean, because you're really talking about like what the trapping network looks like, right, and how many predators were seen on the monitoring cameras annually. Is that the kind of data that you're trying to get at?
Sure. These are big label claims that we've covered this ground, and I'm just saying, perhaps a summary of the evidence would be useful.
And just to be really clear too, that Manaaki Whenua Land Care Research have been instrumental in the design both of the networks and the monitoring to validate those claims, so that, it's not just staff claiming it. We've had a lot of technical input to kind of go, what do we want to achieve, how do we go about it, how do we know when we've got there. That sits in the technical reports.
Thank you. Great work.
Thank you very much. Committee members, are there any other comments or questions? Charlie, your hand's up, is that right? Oh, it's down.
Sorry, hit my turn.
Yeah, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, afternoon. Natalie, thank you for the overview and for the incredible amount of effort in pulling all of this together. I just had a quick, a question about the peer review report. What were your reflections on the peer review report from James Bluder?
I liked that James was already thinking kind of 2 steps ahead, right? Where are we going from this report? And so I think that's a really positive way of working out how we're going to go forward from obviously, finishing Whakatupu mahi and what the next steps are from there.
Because thank you. My reflection is that these 3 projects have been ahead of the curve, if you like, of Predator Free 2050, and there's a lot of benefit of hindsight Whereas my impression seems to be that these things evolve rather organically on an adaptive management learn by doing basis, as I think he refers to. Would you agree that what we've got from the outputs in your closeout report is a platform where we can take the outcomes of the investments and we can take the science and work how we might transfer that into a broader regional initiative? Is that the
Yes,
benefit?
absolutely. I mean, it's also that catch-22, right, is the more you learn, the more you realise you don't know.
Yeah.
But I think James was bang on the money when he said that like adaptive management has been the strength of the projects through time, because I think I mentioned that Potero Tane was the first time wide-scale predator control had been undertaken in farmland, so to understand what that entails and how you get your outcomes, I think that projects have achieved that.
And one of the recommendations seems to be engaging with Māori communities, perhaps more effectively to lift the benefits of this into the future. Was that?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
All right, thank you. So that's sort of the take-home I took. And I'm very pleased to see that we're partnering in this compendium report so that we can, all of the gems that are in the closeout report can be coordinated and marshalled for future use.
Fantastic. Natalie, just the last question around when we might see these next steps, or how we translate what we've learnt in the last 10 years into where do we go next? Do we have a bit of a...
So we're talking about James's next step companion report. So we don't have a firm time frame for that at this point. Obviously want to do it certainly within this calendar year before the knowledge is lost in the mist. But we have sort of we're focused on getting this finished, and then we'll now move to engaging James. He's actually away on a cycle tour of the South Island at the moment, I think. As soon as he's back, we'll get him in the building and have that discussion.
Fantastic. Look forward to hearing from him. I've got a mover, Councillor Curtin, and then second, Councillor Barker. Would you like to speak to the item?
Could I move an amendment?
Can you move an amendment? Okay,
can.
suggest the amendment.
I just think I know Ian said, the recommendation of the environment, closure report, and that staff come back to the EICC with a proposal on how we can better bring this report to the public's attention.
Fantastic. Great amendment. So you'd like to
Have you accepted it?
Yes, well done, Councillor.
I always help make you look good, don't I?
So would you like to speak to any of that?
Just very briefly,
Yeah.
Madam Chair, a lovely report. I loved reading it, actually. It was very clearly articulated, so congratulations if you were the sole author of that. It was a wonderful piece of work. So that's great. I kept wanting to read and wanted to find out more as I read, and thus the question on the big story, in my view, was how successful we've been in the outcomes that we've got to date, let alone the tools that we're able to put into the toolbox for work across the region. I'd be interested as a part of the next steps in terms of the relationship with Biodiversity Hawke's Bay, ways in which I appreciate now, Ian, and it just occurred to me as you mentioned that Biodiversity Hawke's Bay has emerged subsequent to the process. I'd love to see, though, that we do join this up somewhere along the line, because it is probably the preeminent biodiversity project across the region, and given the council's support for Biodiversity Hawke's Bay, is there some way that we can merge that, and even the players are common. So that's a suggestion I'd make as to somehow how we bring those two together. But congratulations on a wonderful report, and I look forward to the addition that Councillor Barker's moved around. How do we get this message out to the public? It's a wonderful story, big investment, and we ought to tell a big story.
Fantastic. Any other comment?
I'd just like to add one thing. I went to, for my benefit, we sent to Sunday school. As a 4-year-old, I remember being lectured on not hiding your light under a bushel. Took me a long time to figure out what a bushel was and why you'd ever hide your light under it. But it's actually really true. And if we don't do something with this report, we will be hiding our light under a bushel. People quite often ask, what does the regional council do? What's its purpose and so on? Well, this is a wonderful story we need to tell, and we need to help people make the connections. My relative in Hastings is really impressed that she can hear tui around her place, but makes no connection between the bird life, the improved bird life, and Cape to City. When I've explained to her, she was really impressed. Well, this is wonderful. There's a whole range of things which are happening and people aren't making the connections between the activities in improving pest control, improving biodiversity, and the work of the regional council and how it makes their environment and the neighbourhood a better place to be. It also then turns on to the approach that they'll have towards the regional council and any other requests it does for further assistance with rates and so on, because people want to know that their money is well spent. And this is a fabulous example of good money being very well spent. And we should not step back from this as a great story. It read really well.
Very
Thank
true.
you for your work.
Thank you. And I'm fully in support of that amendment. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Natalie. We have our next item is an update on the PCA partial RPMP review process. So Ian,
Yes, Chair.
just an
introduction.
update?
Yeah. So I think you've met Lauren, who's providing project management support for this process. She's going to bring up, I think, a brief presentation while she's doing that. Look, really quickly, just bring you up to speed on where we're at with the partial plan change process and the work of the Bio-Working Party. Keynote for me is that we've shifted the timeframes out a little bit. We'd set an arbitrary date of 30th June this year, originally to match the desire to operationalise the change on 1 July in line with our financial years, but subsequent engagement with Council has obviously deferred that to the long-term plan, which was fine. So we're just saying we'll give ourselves a bit more space to make sure we get the process right. So that's really important. Just to be really clear though, we are pursuing from 1 July enhanced PCA monitoring. So that's been contracted right now and we'll start. So we're not losing focus on possum management broadly otherwise. And that obviously engagement formally and informally will carry on during those periods. But yeah, Lauren will run you through it. Mark's here to support her as well. So any questions after that, happy to take them.
Thank you, Lauren. Welcome.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It's really just a broad update today, really on the partial plan pest review process. So noting that the review has been extended out, we have been allowed a little bit more time when it's come obviously to getting together our documents and making sure that we're hitting all the steps of the Biosecurity Act. So just running you through a few of the things that we have been up to in the interim. The main piece of work that we've really got 90% completed now is the first draft of the PCA proposal. So this has been, I suppose, created in conjunction with a consultant who is very much aware of the Biosecurity Act. And this is really just making sure that we're ticking all the boxes and making sure that we're not going to potentially end up in hearings later on this year. So the biosecurity, where am I going? Okay, so as well as also the proposal, we've also managed to come up with a communication and engagement plan. This is really making sure that we're touching base with our external stakeholders, making sure that they're aware about proposed changes, and obviously trying to take on any board any feedback that they might have for us. So far, I've managed to meet with MPI, Beef and Lamb, and Federated Farmers, and so far the feedback has been really positive, which is great. We are still wanting to touch base with a few forestry groups, and we're hoping to kind of do that over the next few weeks. But as everyone's aware, calendars are very tight at the moment, and with COVID obviously happening, it's very hard to try and get those faces in front of you. A main piece of work that we've really got underway as part of the process is putting together a biosecurity working party. This is just really making sure that we have got a few councillors together to hear our sort of plans, hear what we've been up to, and really keep them up to date with the progress that we're maintaining during this entire review. So we've probably had 2 face-to-face meetings and 1 over email, and a massive bit that's really come out of this has been that we need that independent expert to really come in and really give that technical expertise on the things that are coming forward from now. So if I then go to the main piece of work that... Sorry?
Who's that person up on the first line?
That's our chair. So Will Foley has been appointed as a chair for the BWP moving forward. Happy to take questions at the end. As well as also taking in an independent expert. So I'm not sure if any of you are aware of someone called John Simmons. So when we initially ran this review, well, our Rural Pest Management Plan process last time, which I think was in 2017, 2018, he was part of the Biosecurity Working Party, so he is very well versed in terms of what points we need to hit, and he's really good at obviously providing that technical expertise moving forward. So, another thing that we've passed through the Biosecurity Working Party has been really making sure that they're aware of the engagement process and trying to get that feedback from them. They're really happy with our progress so far, but obviously we are wanting to update them with the forestry piece moving forward, because just obviously wanting to see what that stakeholder's got to say. For the next 2 years, we do not want to add any additional costs for the possum contracting to the overall planned and budgeted HBRC annual rates increases. This is then going to come part of the Finance and Revenue Policy review, which is going to be undertaken in the next, I believe, 6 to 8 months. And obviously, once we've got an update on what that'll look like in terms of the funding analysis, we can then give an update on that. But at the moment, we're really just focusing on making sure that the PCA review is focused entirely on we're changing the mode of delivery. We're not focusing on costs and where the money's coming from at this stage. So as Ian said a couple of minutes ago this morning, we are extending out the timeline really just to make sure that we're getting this process correct. There has been a few staffing changes over the last few weeks, last few months, and we really want to make sure that we get this process right, noting how far we've come with it and noting just the massive biodiversity benefits of HBRC and the Hawke's Bay region will benefit from having this process pushed through. So I'm going to show you just a little bit of a very, very basic time frame on what this is going to look like. I'm happy to take comments about it moving forward. But what this is pretty much looking forward to, so the next piece of work, once we get the Biosecurity Working Party independent expert John Simmons on board, we then need to really focus on the public consult piece. So this public consult piece is more than likely going to happen from the middle of May until the middle of June. Really want to try and get that external buy-in and really try and see what the public have got to say. Moving on from that, we're going to then go through the Biosecurity Working Party again. We will then give the EICC an opportunity to read the proposal once it's been completed and in its final version. And then moving on from that, we really want to try and get it approved by Council towards the end of the year, at the end of September. And then obviously it's got the seal of approval and it's all going to go ahead, hopefully. So at the moment, it is still quite a base. It's a very basic Gantt chart in its form at the moment, but it's really just about nutting out what's really, really important for the next steps of the process. But obviously there's a few more things that go in there. So that's kind of all I've got for you today. The intent of the next Biosecurity Working Party will be to have another review of the proposal that we're working on. And with that, with those recommendations, we're then hoping to have a final review done. Then the next EICC, you'll be able to read through that in its entirety, and then we can try and take comments from it.
Thank you, Lauren. Very concise work program. Thank you for the overview. I'll just hand it over to the new chair of that working group, Councillor Foley, for any summary or overview you'd like to provide.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Lauren, for that overview. Hopefully it's all pretty self-explanatory. Where the group and the work has got to so far. I guess I just point out, why we've got to where we've got to today, and that's simply the noticeable increase in possums out there in the environment after what was a very successful PCA program for many years before now, and that reporting of people noticing possums and haven't seen them for years just continues, and so to me it just reinforces the importance of this review and this work that we're doing. And yeah, I guess just note we did get from the wider council for no immediate rate increases in the next year or two, and not out till the next LTP, and so we've taken that on board and doing what we can in between now and then to start making some differences.
Thank you, Will. Committee members, do we have questions, comments? Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you for the report, Lauren. I've actually got a question for James, who I see is on the screen. The big problem that we've somewhat deferred into the next long-term plan is the price tag on all of this, and the reference in here to the who pays discussion being in the broader revenue and financing policy review. Can I just get a better understanding of what that financing and policy review will cover? Is that our rating system? Is it something else? Is it this in the context of a rating system? And how do the two sort of fit together? How does this fit with the financing review?
Yes, it is. So look, it is a review of our rating system, but essentially all of our targeted rates. Although obviously that which is not funded by a targeted rate, but is still going to be ratepayer funded, falls to the general rate or the UAGC. So ultimately, the review of the policy will be looking at our entire rating structure. We're going through that through a prioritised set of issues. And certainly possums because of the issue we have here, as well as things like the Tukituki scheme, where we've made previous commitments to reviewing that as a priority. Front end of that process. But yes, we are lining up at the moment 4 workshops prior to the local government elections, and then 4 after that for council to have deep engagement and discussion on the priority areas of our current rating structure that need review.
Thank you. That's what I thought it was. I just wanted to be sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barker.
Just a picky little thing, and it's always in the quest to constant improvements, incremental. I really liked, again, your report. I thought it was great. I love the structure. I really like this. But there were some things that you gave us in your oral report I would prefer to have in your report.
Okay, happy to take
For
that
2
up.
reasons. One, that I can read it in advance and be better informed and so on. But more importantly, it's part of then the historical record of what the council had. So you put up a report, it's not exactly in our record, but when it's in our papers, it's in the record. And clearer and for easier for people to see. So when you write these reports, you should be thinking about not only what people have in their mind to come to the meeting, but also the trail you leave behind you, the historical trail. You're writing history when you write these reports.
Thank you, that's
But
great.
great report, thank you.
Based on that, would you like to move the paper?
I certainly will.
And the presentation. And Councillor Foley, thank you. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you very much. Thank you. And our last item, we have discussion of minor items, and we have Councillor Barker. Yours is EICC meeting venues.
Yes, I'd like for the really important thing is that there's got to be build a relationship between the governors and the governed, and that's fundamental democracy. And I think that we need to, in some ways, find about how we can build our relationship with the public. No disrespect to the Councillor Curtin's committee and the all-powerful Finance, Audit and Risk Committee, but if we take a committee of the council which was the most engaging and the most attractive to the public to look at, it's the Environment Committee. So,
transport.
No butting in, please. No butting in.
I'll get my chance.
Well, there's no right to reply. But anyway, I just think for the next round, we should be looking at taking council committees to other locations and to engage with the public in a meaningful way, not just to have a meeting. But I would like us to, for example, and I'm stealing the idea, I'll give it, stealing the idea, is that we should talk to Tangata Whenua, other groups in, for example, Central Hawke's Bay, about what are the issues they have they'd like us to see, engage them to go and have a quick tour of those things, show them some things we're interested in, and then have our public meeting down there. In that way, we reach out in a meaningful way. We say, you show us tell us what you're interested in. We'll come and have a look at it and build our relationship, because we have to build our relationship and strengthen it with our community. And I think having a meeting here on Zoom is very good. It's open to all the public, but it's not as good as we could be. So I'd like us to think about a program of doing that.
Thank you, Councillor Barker.
Can I abuse the process? I'd like to do briefly, if I could do, and that's about deer. We have a growing problem with deer. It's not really the regional council's problem entirely, but it is. The public are growing, large public are getting very concerned about the explosion of deer. Others getting concerned about what it's doing to the bush on the kawekas and ruahinis, etc. And I would ask that we could have, if not a written report, a verbal report from our staff about what they understand to be the situation with deer in Hawke's Bay, who's responsible, has it, just a description so the public can get an airing of what the issue is. At the moment it's very opaque, no one can see what's being done. Everybody knows there's a problem, but no one can see who's got what.
Thank you. Noted.
Thank you.
Councillor Williams? No, sorry, Councillor Curtin. Oh.
Madam Chair, I wanted to raise the COVID issue because I have a sense, or would like to know, the impacts on our operational outputs from representatives here today, Ian and Chris, around what's happening out there to our staff delivering. What are the impacts on delivery of projects, not only from the ground up, but also within the organisation, the administratively as well, and whether in fact we need to make some adjustments to that, either with forecasting workflow or some other adjustments. For example, our meetings, do we need to adjust the timing of our meetings, push things out? I just listened to the radio this morning, the dramatic impact on projects throughout New Zealand, really. A number have just come to a grinding halt because they just don't have the staff on board. Now, I don't know if it's true for the regional council, but the community as a whole, in terms of supply chain and the like, are probably facing the biggest COVID challenge we've had in the last 2 years, in direct impact on the people in the community. I don't know if there's scope for response now, but...
Thank you, Councillor. What I might do is pass that on to James for us to discuss more in councillor-only meeting, which will be in a couple of weeks. If that's the most appropriate place where we can have that discussion. Do you agree, Councillor Barker? Thank you.
Well, there is a, this is out of 10, there is a corporate strategic meeting next week.
Well, we'll find a space for it, but I think it's worth noting in the concern there. It's just finding the right place for discussion for it. So if we can park that one to the next appropriate time. Thank you, Councillor. And that is the end. Thank you so much for your participation. It's been a great meeting. I really enjoyed the discussion. It's been in-depth, insightful, and we've got some exciting things to happen within the council. So on that, can I please get you to close, Councillor Foley?
Thank you, Chair. Well done on a well-run meeting. And on the final note of Councillor Curtin's, it's potentially going to be a tough couple of weeks for our region, for our people. So we ask that everyone looks out for one another, our neighbours and wider families, and hope we all get through it best we can. I ask you to all join in our final prayer. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o te tātou ariki ahi karaiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhi tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, aki, amini.
Kia ora, thank you very much.